Close that. I'm going to shrink this a little bit. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. And I'll use that mute button. So let me just check this really quick.
Oh, can't hear you now.
Was I muted when I did that?
Yeah, you did it. You were.
Okay. I have a mute switch that broke, and I sent it in, and they've had it for 5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And I'm still getting over bronchitis, so I have a mute switch on my mixer that I'll use, but I also have the mute switch in Ecamm that I may use when you're talking. So, okay, I have a mute switch that broke, and I sent it in, and they've had it for 5 weeks.
It looks like
I'm
we're
still getting over bronchitis, so I have a mute switch on my mixer that I'll use, but I also have the mute switch in Ecamm. That is a hell of a delay.
I know, and for some reason, it hasn't gone to the counter card's actually gone live, but that's okay. There's been some kind of
where were you seeing that? Because I'm looking right now on YouTube. Was that on YouTube or Facebook?
YouTube.
Let me go look. Let me refresh it. Oh, coffee time. There it is. All right, because I'm going to pull that up just so that I can see comments and stuff too.
That's cool. Weirdly,
that's right.
There's some slight technical issue here in the sense that it doesn't, for some reason, it doesn't allow me to go and.
Okay, I am in there. Yep, and I'm in there as me instead of behind the shot, so I had to log out and log back in.
Cool. So it seems like for some reason we're not streaming to Facebook, but that's maybe a problem for another day. And I don't know.
You're not?
Sure
let me look. Hold on. Let me refresh that one. It should allow you to do both in Ecamm.
Yeah, it should, but for some reason my recording button didn't work, so I had to go into Stream Deck.
I lost your audio, I think. Oh, no, there you are.
Can you hear me
weren't
now?
talking. That's what. Yeah, you weren't talking. That's what it was.
Okay, that's probably why. All right, well, I think for some reason we are only streaming to YouTube. So if you are watching on, well, you can't be watching on Facebook. If you're waiting on Facebook, then tough luck for today, I'm afraid.
They're not going to hear you say that, though.
Yeah, exactly, right. So it doesn't very bad. Well, that's a technical thing. I'm going to have to figure out why that is. It shouldn't have done that, but sometimes the gremlins are in this. So I don't know. Anyway, let's see. Cool. Anyhow, so here we are. If you've just, if you're joining at this stage, then here we are. All right. Anyway, let me just switch screen real quick because if you are watching, you're wondering where that other voice comes from. There he is, Mr. Steve Brazill, live on the live stream. How's it going, man?
Good. How are you, man?
I'm very good. Are you in Vegas still, or are you back home?
No, I was in Vegas for NAB, and I have a condo there, so I've been remodeling. Let me center myself here a little bit. So we've been remodeling our condo there, and we were there all of last week, but we're back home in Southern California now, at least for a little bit.
Cool. Awesome. So for those people who don't know, I don't know, probably not very many people on the planet, but for those who don't know, Steve is the host of the Behind the Shot podcast and also radio presenter over in California. What's your station called again?
It's 96.7 FM, 96.7 KCal Rocks. It's in Redlands, California. So it's, where the easiest way to describe the area that I'm in, the Inland Empire, is we are exactly halfway. I mean, almost exactly halfway between LA proper and Palm Springs.
Right. Okay, cool. So if you're in that area and you can pick up that station, make sure you listen to that because from what I've heard on social media, it sounds pretty cool. And of course,
it's a rock station. You got to like
it's a rock station. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So, and of course, if you are into photography, podcast, then do me a favor and check out Steve's podcast, Behind the Shot, as well. Super awesome. In fact, one of the podcasts that inspired one of the podcasts I used to listen to before I ever started the Camera Shake podcast. So that's definitely true to say.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
Definitely.
I never knew that.
Did you not? Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a bunch of photography podcasts that I used to listen to, obviously, out of interest. And Behind the Shot was one of them. Yeah. So, and that all of that contributed originally to the idea of me even starting a podcast in the first place. It was just one of these things.
And you've surpassed me. You've surpassed me on number of episodes.
Oh yeah, but that's because I put out episodes weekly and you're doing it fortnightly. So
Exactly.
that's it's inevitable. Eventually, I'll surpass them all. That's my goal.
You will take over the world.
Yes, exactly. I don't know, but just literally just had the 200th episode anniversary happening. So, it's quite an occasion. I didn't do anything for it. I should really do so. We should celebrate it somehow. Maybe that's what we'll do today. We can celebrate that with a rum and Coke. Cheers.
Or a Diet Coke.
Or a
Cheers.
Diet Coke. It's actually a rum and Coke Zero. It's a mix that works.
For me, you know me. For me, it would be a whiskey. And it's funny
Yes.
because I'm browsing Apple News one day and I'm looking at, I always search for American whiskey to see what the news is because I collect whiskey. And it comes back that at the London Spirits Awards, there was a particular bourbon that was voted in. They do Spirit Awards in 26 categories. And in the bourbon category, they named this one bourbon. And I'm like, oh, well, that's going to blow up. I want to get a bottle before everybody wants this bottle. So I ordered one for me and one for my son. And I popped it open last night. And it may be the worst smelling whiskey I've ever smelled in my life. And I can't figure out what people in London are doing that they think that's good American whiskey.
It's one of these things, and you know this because I text you once in a while when I come across a cool-looking bottle of whiskey, and I'm like, Steve, is this any good? Because I know nothing when it comes to whiskey. So I rely on expertise.
It's amazing how many creatives, like I was just in Vegas for NAB, National Association of Broadcasters, what it used to be called. But I was just in Vegas for that, and I met with, I don't know if you know Photo Joseph of the Photo Joseph YouTube channel. It's all camera gear and live streaming and video stuff. And I was there with Alex Lindsay of Office Hours and Mac Break Weekly and all of that. And they're both whiskey fans as well, so we talk whiskey a lot. But it's amazing how many creatives are whiskey drinkers.
Yeah, I mean, I hear it all the time as well, and it's one of these things that I just don't have any knowledge of, just generally when it comes to liquor. I don't have, a little while ago I got into gin, and then Bergman got me into rum for some reason, over in Norway.
Yeah, that's David.
So, yeah. Rum and Coke,
when he
that was
says
the thing.
Bergman, for those that don't know, that's David Bergman, the tour photographer extraordinaire.
Yes, exactly. So somehow that's what happened. Anyway, that's what happened after hours in the Lofoten Islands. Anyway, there was a lot of rum and Coke going around. But yeah, that's kind of a tradition I've upheld.
How you been otherwise?
I've been good. Yeah, I've been super busy, man. It's been incredible. Like there's been, there's been a lot of stuff going on with the Camera Shake podcast, of course, and then there's just been a number of big scale events over the last sort of 6-8 weeks or something that have just, it just meant it's been super busy. Everything from Battle of the Bands events that I organize to we're having a concert event coming up at the Albert Hall on Monday, where I've been designing not only like a 38-page program, but I've also been designing a lot of slideshow videos that are playing on the massive screen at the back of the stage. So whilst it's sort of a choral.
What's the show?
It's called Echoes. It's basically 2,000 kids from primary schools from across the county of Buckinghamshire, or Buckinghamshire for you North Americans over Um, it's 2000. Anyways, it's 2000 primary school kids who come together to perform at the Albert Hall, and it's typically one of those events we run it every 2 years. Yeah, every 2 years, and it usually sells out. So we're selling the Albert Hall out with that thing, and every time there's music that's commissioned for it. There's an orchestra that performs alongside those kids. There's about 1,000 kids on the stage and 1,000 kids in the space in front of the, in front of the. It's called the oval, so the space in front of the stage, and then during the interval they switch over. So you get to move 2,000 kids from one place to another in the Albert Hall, which was never built for that amount of people. So it's interesting. So,
So
but
it's one of the prettiest places I've ever been. My good friend Christy Goodwin is the photographer for Royal Albert Hall for concerts and
yes,
everything. And amazing photographer. I would argue probably my favorite photographer on the planet, if not one of the, top favorite photographers on the planet. And she took us on a tour when we were in London a couple of years ago of Royal Albert Hall. If you ever get the chance to do the tour of Royal Albert Hall, it is amazing. And then at the end of the tour, one of the tours includes this thing where you can go into their, cafe, restaurant, whatever, and have tea and, snacks. And it was just so good.
yeah, the Albert Hall is really phenomenal. I mean, first of all, it's such a, it's such a historically important venue. If you think about how many,
Yeah.
I mean, the greatest artists in the world over the last 140 years. It just had its 150th. It just had its 150th anniversary last year. And so the world's greatest artists across all genres of music, have performed there. So, from Pavarotti to the Beatles to the Stones to Jimi Hendrix to like you name it, they've played there. Um,
Clapton has played there, I think, more than anybody.
yeah.
And, it's the subject of a Beatles song.
Yes, exactly. And also the origin of many famous quotes. For those of you,
Yeah.
what did Lennon say? Clap your hands for those of you in the boxes, rattle your jewelry or something like that. I can't remember, but that's the approximate quote. So it's interesting, when I remember the first time I've shot the Albert Hall probably 5 or 6 times by now. But I remember the first time I went there and I walked out on the stage, and when you're standing on the stage and you're looking out, it's it's incredible feeling, especially if you only know that place from TV, or from photographs. It's quite phenomenal when you actually stand there and you think like, oh wow, that's that stage has seen so many phenomenal performers in the past. It's incredible.
Those pipes in the background.
Yeah.
It's just there's something about photography there specifically that looks like no other hall. I mean, a concert hall to some extent, whatever arena an artist is playing in, it's an arena, or whatever stadium they're playing in. Okay, it can be a beautiful stadium, but it's a stadium. There is nothing else like Royal Albert Hall from a photo point of view. Like when you're up on that top floor, and shooting down. I've never done it, but in photos that I've seen, and you're photographing down, it is shockingly beautiful the way that
Yeah,
building lights up.
exactly. It's called the gallery up there, and it's quite. When you stand up there, you're quite high up. It's
Yes.
if you're suffering from like a fear of heights or something, this is probably not the best place to be. In fact, if you go one floor below that and you walk all the way up to the front seats right by the railing, that it's not very high. I mean, you kind of feel like you might be falling off. It's it doesn't inspire a sense of security necessarily or safety, but it's beautiful. The ceiling is very beautiful as well. They have these weird sort of circular things that are extended from the ceiling. And then if the lighting is right, you have the ceiling glow in different colors. You're above the smoke, so when you're up there, you're looking down at the stage area, and you're actually above the smoke and everything. It's a very beautiful vista from up there. Yeah, it's very nice.
And the top floor, I think it's rumored to be haunted.
I tell you what. So here's the thing, right? Not many people know this. Um, so the Albert Hall has an underground parking garage that you only get to access if you're a performer, for example, or you're like a tech guy or something, or you're offloading. There's like a loading bay, but it's all underground underneath the hall. And it's actually quite beautiful down there. They've like created really nice wall murals. You know, there's like artists like Hendrix and stuff on the walls. You come in, it's all a bit rough and ready, but actually it's beautiful because they sort of painted the walls and stuff. It's good fun. But then when you walk from the loading bay into the tunnels that take you through to the the freight elevator and all that kind of stuff, you literally walking through tunnels that are as old as the Albert Hall, where you can still see the unfinished brick walls that are 150 years old from when it was first built, right? So that's this little labyrinth that you have to kind of move through. And if that isn't haunted, then I don't know, because that's definitely feel haunted when you walk through that part.
It's
fun.
just such a, again, I love London, and it's just such a cool place. And it's right across the street from Prince Albert Memorial. It's right by Hyde Park. It's just a really neat place.
Yeah, it's very nice. It's a really great place. Like I said, acoustically, it's a great concert hall, and it's not actually as big as you might think it is. When you know it from like watching performances on TV, for example, or if you watch the proms at the Albert Hall, for example, it looks much bigger than it actually is. The one thing that surprised me the first time I was there was it's actually relatively compact, but it's probably not surprising because it was built 150 years ago. So
Right.
and as you sort of walk through the backstage areas, you'll see loads of photographs on the walls everywhere, depicting scenes from concerts there. Everybody from Dave Grohl to Eric Clapton to whatever, is on there. And among them are photographs from a long time ago, like, I don't know, an automobile fair from 1900, or like images from when the hall was built 150 years ago, with like wooden scaffolding and like wooden cranes and all. It's pretty incredible, really.
A lot of the more modern shots, definitely not the ones from when it was originally built, but a lot of the more modern shots, the Clapton and stuff like that, and Dave Grohl. A lot of those images are Christie's images.
Yes.
In fact, they have the Royal Albert Hall sells a lot of her photos. Folks, if you don't know Christy Goodwin, go look up Christy Goodwin because just amazing. So when you do this thing, though, you're designing the program for it. Is that what it is?
Yes, correct. So for this particular performance, or for this event, I'm designing the program as well as anything visual that happens in the hall. So anything that gets projected, anything that happens on screens, anything visual. So this could be video content. It could be stills images. So in this case, it's all stills images. They're basically animated slideshows, basically.
How'd you get
And
that gig?
how? So I work as part of what I do. I do a lot of marketing things for the Buckinghamshire Music Trust, and so it's an event that's basically organized by the Buckinghamshire Music Trust. So in my role as being part of the marketing there, which basically means I create all the imagery. So that's my job, really, is to create all the imagery. I create a lot of video content. I do a lot of stuff for advertising and stuff like that. And so part of my job is to do all these things. And because for some reason years ago, I took it upon myself. When I first started there, I looked at all the print media that they had, like flyers and posters and stuff, and I thought it was terrible because it was literally made on Word or Microsoft Publisher or something. It looked absolutely atrocious. So I kind of thought I could do something better than that. So I started designing flyers and posters, and so then that became a thing, and then I thought like, oh, I need some pictures for this poster, and so I then started photographing all the concerts, and so hence that's what I do. Yeah. Oh, I see Micah Burke is watching. Hey, Micah, man, how's it going?
Yeah, Micah's in the chat. And if anybody else is in the chat, say hey. I appreciate your having me on today, man. This is fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been about time, man. It's we haven't caught up in a while, so I thought, and
Yeah,
I know
and go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say because we text regularly, and so I know you've been to NAP and stuff like that. And I kind of thought it'd be an interesting thing to talk about, just generally. But I also, I want to make these live streams more regular because it's a fun thing to do, and I don't have to edit anything afterwards. It's beautiful.
Oh my God. Yeah. And that was when I used to do the so for years through my podcast, I did for, I don't know, 2 years, a little over 2 years, Don Komarechka, who and I did an image critique series. And that was the fun of it, was I didn't have to edit anything. It was up, done. When I hit stop streaming, I was finished. And it was funny because I'm a little bit weirdly detail oriented, I'll say, rather than OCD. But it would bother me to have the live stream starting soon, or the banter. I'd always do like an official start, and I'd always want to go in and trim the start to right when we started the critique show. The problem with YouTube is if you do that, it screws up all kinds of things. If you trim was it the beginning or the end? One of the two at that point in time. I don't know if YouTube's fixed it, but I used to trim the end and trim the beginning. And if you trim the beginning, I think it would cut off like a minute of the end. And so I finally learned, just don't touch it after I'm done streaming. And it drove the OCD part of me a little nuts, but at the same time, it was so easy. I hit stop and I was done.
Yeah, there are many advantages, to doing live streams. I think it's if you can build it into your diary, into your calendar, I think it's a good thing to do. It's also fun, and it's it's a little bit more. I don't know. I was going to say it's a little bit more authentic, but actually, to be honest with you, I don't really do a lot of editing on the Camera Shake podcast anyway. So that's really pretty much as authentic as it gets. If they're like massive mishaps, I will cut them out. And this might be like, I don't know, a delivery guy ringing the doorbell, or my dog going crazy, something like that. Of course I'll take that out. But other than that, there's really not a lot of editing that goes on in it. I'm not one of these people who like edit out every and ah and every gap and all that kind of stuff. So I just couldn't.
So it's funny because I watch, and my shows take forever to edit because I do this. But again, I can't not. I watch when I'm done recording the same day I record. If it's an hour and 15-minute show, I watch the hour and 15-minute show and I edit it. And if there's a pronounced number of that type of thing, I'll mute those if it makes sense. But I know people, so for me to watch an hour show and edit it and get to the end can take me double the time. If it's an hour show, it'll take me 2 hours to get through it and
Easy.
Mute the things I want or cut out the things. But I know people who cut out every gap especially on audio podcasts. And there's software that will automatically cut out gaps in podcasts. And I understand the idea of they want it tight and they want it, whatever. And in YouTube, for example, people don't want to sit through long shows. They want to tighten it up. But here's my thing, and this is the radio background of me. Audio and video to me has always been theater of the mind. And there is something amazingly powerful about hearing somebody think, right? You do this. When you ask somebody a question, isn't it kind of a cool feeling when you ask them a question and they go, wow, good question. Let me think. And then they answer it. That thinking is so powerful, and most people cut it out.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I feel. And it's also, it's really a stylistic question as well, because let's say in a podcast scenario, like the Camera Shake podcast, where it's really a conversation between two people, where these gaps naturally happen. That's just how a conversation flows,
Yes.
And so I love it to stay in there, just for that authenticity, basically. But when I make instructional videos, let's say for Platypod, for example, I use a completely different editing style. That's really fast and very fast paced because I need to get a lot of information in those 7 minutes, for example. And so
Right.
there, I'm literally dragging the viewer along with me by making everything super fast paced. And there, I cut out a lot of gaps. And because it's video, of course, you end up with jump cuts once you cut something out, even if it's just a little gap between words, like the gap after just now. I would basically cut that out and I would hide all of those cuts with B-roll. So
Right.
what you actually get is a super fluent impression, but really what it means is I've done quite a lot of editing on the vocal part of it, on the speech part to
So,
make it as
okay,
good.
that brings a question in then, because the big thing for years now on YouTube has been visual jump cuts, right? Where it's a talking head and the talking head is over here, and then suddenly the talking head is over here because they cut it and nobody has a problem with it. They're cutting it tight and it's jumping, and or they use the old, they're shooting in 4K or they're shooting in 1080, which makes it look really bad. And what they do when they jump cut it is they do a zoom, right? So suddenly it's here and then it's here wider because they're trying to hide cuts. And I've been to YouTube channels where, especially the zoom thing, but the jump cuts in whatever format, whether it just be, okay, I'm going to splice it here, and if there's no continuity in the position of that talking head, I don't care, or they're zooming every 10 seconds in, out, in, out, in, out. And it
Yeah.
almost gives me motion sickness. I do what you do. I hide it through B-roll, right? If and because it's a photography podcast, if somebody says something, has a coughing attack, whatever, and I have to cut it out, hopefully it happens at a point where I can just put the photo up on screen that we're talking about, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, on the with the platypod videos, I really use all of those techniques. I use zoom ins, B-roll. Sometimes I leave the jump cuts in. It just depends. It's really it all boils down to the speed at which I can deliver that particular piece of information. And typically there's a lot of B-roll there because the way I film them is, I would basically, let's say I'm talking about a particular photographic technique, right? So at the moment, I'm making lots of content about toy photography, right? So in particular, Lego minifigs. And so, it's just sort of a little mini series. We're talking about, light and how to light things like that, and lens choices and how to use
Yeah.
multiple lights and how to use color lights and all that, to create some really cool shots of these very tiny minifigs. And and so there's quite a lot of kind of conceptual stuff that there's a lot of explainer stuff that I have to talk through, like talk about lens choices, for example, or different lighting modifiers. So in the first episode, I just simply explained, I was talking about the characteristics of light, just for people to understand how light actually functions, how it works, and how that applies to very small things like Lego minifigures, So there's a lot of conceptual, theoretical stuff that I'm talking through, but I'm going to have to visualize that somehow, because just watching me talking about that whole theoretical concept is a pretty dry and boring thing to do. So I then have to create a lot of B-roll to basically then visualize what I'm talking about. So I'll literally take the script and I'll go through and I'll then visualize pretty much everything that I'm saying, and I'm thinking like, okay, how can I turn this into a visual component by using Lego minifigures, for example, because that's the subject we're talking about, And then when it comes to me creating an actual shot, I would create the shot first, then I would film the B-roll, or I would write the script, and then I would basically film the B-roll based on that script, and then it'd be relatively easy to put that together in the edit because it's all kind of laid out like this. But often, I'd have to create the shot first, and so I'd already pretty much know how long the video is going to be approximately, and then if I think like, okay, well, this is like spending 9 minutes talking about this particular thing, that's really a little too long. I have to cut that down by 2 minutes. I'm going to have to literally speed up the way I'm talking, so I need to cut out lots of gaps, and I really need to kind of accelerate it or even take a sentence out here or there, just to push it along a little bit, to get that information across as quickly as possible. So it's fun to do, but it's a completely different editing style from something
You're right.
like the Camera Shake podcast.
See, and for mine, I don't shoot any B-roll. Even when I did a Canon autofocus video that ended up being an hour and 45 minutes, the big complaint was, I wish you went out in the field and shot some B-roll of showing how to use that autofocus feature. And I made the conscious decision to not do that, A, for time, but B, because, look, as you very well know, if we talk autofocus, like somebody commented on my Canon one the other day, and they said, okay, in fact, it was just yesterday, what autofocus point setting should I have for shooting race cars on a dirt track? And I'm like, well, if you ask 5 different photographers that question, specific to even the Canon R5, you're going to get 10 different answers.
Exactly, yeah.
Because I may choose to use a zone, and somebody else may choose to use a single point, and other people may choose to use an expanded point. And none of them are wrong. It's going to be based on how you work with the camera. That's kind of the beauty of cameras. But when I shoot my normal podcast, I have kind of built-in B-roll options. I have the ability to show the photograph that we're doing full screen, as opposed to with the 2 of us on screen. When I talk about a website, I have the ability to put that website up, maybe angle it at 45 degrees and have it scroll and animate it. And so that's all kind of built in. But you said something that made me think of a question as somebody who does YouTube. You said at first that the Platypod videos, you try to be seven minutes. And then you said when it's 9 minutes, you have to cut 2 minutes out. Again, getting to 7 minutes. Where'd the 7 minutes come from? Why 7?
It's just something that's sort of it's just naturally gotten to that point. I've made in the beginning. I made
That's
some
a
videos
number
that were
you
like,
pulled, though.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, there's no like no science
Research?
behind it.
Yeah.
No, there's no
Okay.
research behind it. It's basically, I figured. So when we first started this project of like creating instructional videos for the Platypod YouTube channel, we kind of thought like, oh well, anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes, that's kind of where we want to be. 12 minutes, maybe something like that. But then very quickly, it turned out that actually, if you can explain something in 7 minutes, that you would like, if you make a video that's 12 minutes long, but you could have explained that in 7 minutes, then you've just wasted 5 minutes of the viewer's time. So actually, It makes more sense to really compress it and actually just bring the information across in an as efficient manner as possible. And then that's of course the question of quantities, like how much information can you bring across in one video where it sort of makes sense, where people can actually follow along, they learn something, they retain something, rather than bombarding somebody with like X amount of facts and concepts and whatever. But by the end of it, you can't even remember what happened at the beginning. So it was really just a matter of like finding that happy medium, where you can talk about a particular thing, educate somebody in how to do a particular thing without really going into like the super duper granular detail. So what I would do, for instance, when I'm describing a particular shot that I create, this might be toy photography or whatever it may be, I'll go through how I create the shot, and I give people the reasons why I choose this kind of lighting over another, and why I position things in this place, and why I use that particular lens, whatever, of course. And people get a really good look of what the setup is, like how will the light set up, where was the camera, and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the editing part, for instance, I really just fly over the Photoshop bit really quickly, if I include it at all. If there's something very specific that I'm doing in Photoshop, like from creating depth of field, for example, or something like that, then yes, I will basically give a brief description of the technique. I'm not going to go into like a full-on 30-minute visual version of the edit. That's maybe a different thing. If people are super interested in that, I could spin that out as almost like a separate series. But that's not really what this is for. This is more like, if I'm going to show you how to, I don't know, photograph toy automobiles, right? and how to get some really cool images and how to light it in a really cool way. And then you can put your own style on it. You can put your own spin on it, because hopefully by the end of the video, you sort of got to the point where you understand how to light something like that, and how to get what lens to choose for what reason.
That's kind of the same reason that I didn't put the B-roll in that autofocus video. Was I want to tell you what all of these things are. I don't want to pre-populate your mind with the idea that you would then apply it this way, right? I want you to populate that in your own mind of now I understand what they mean. What am I going to do with it? But you said something interesting to me with the 7-minute idea of look, if you can, most people think of YouTube videos as 10 to 15. Like when you said that, I'm like, yeah, that's what I would have assumed. But if we can do it in 7 instead of 12, that's 5 minutes of the viewer's time that we're saving. And with my radio thing, it's kind of fun, the fact that I do radio, but I also do podcasting. Because again, like we talked earlier, when I do a podcast, I don't worry about saying I don't worry about brevity. I don't worry about editing my words. I let myself stumble or think. Whereas on the radio, coming out of a song and going into a commercial break, I want to get in and out, right? We try to respect the listener's time. They're driving down the road. They want to hear the music, but we also want to let them know what's happening, that we have this coming up or this is happening or whatever the case might be. And it's really honestly a respect of people's time. And when you said, you don't want to go into 17 different things because they won't retain it. Again, it relates to radio for me. In my early days in radio, there was a restaurant who wanted to do a 60-second commercial. And in that 60-second commercial, and this, by the way, relates to photography in many ways. In that 60-second commercial, they wanted to say, come on down to Harry C's. Monday we have this, and Tuesday is taco night, and Wednesday is this, and Thursday is this, and Friday is this. And I looked at the owner and I went, just get him in the door. Once you get him in the door, like, your job isn't to tell them Monday through Friday. I know you want to do that because you own the restaurant, but you just need to get them in the door. Once you get them in the door, you can educate them all day long on what you are doing on those individual days. They're not going to retain any of this, and you're actually going to bombard them with too many things. And I think the same applies to photography. When you're taking a photograph, or for that matter, videography or being a creative, being succinct to the point of what that particular conversation, podcast, video, whatever is, matters. If you're doing a platypod video, be succinct, be tight, because that's what it needs. If you're doing a conversation, that's a different thing. My favorite advertisement of all time, and with your graphic design skills, you'll appreciate this. And actually, our friend Dave Clayton would appreciate this probably. I was a kid at the time, and it was in a magazine, print magazine, which pretty much don't exist anymore. And you're flipping the pages, and one of the pages, I'm going to call it 8.5 by 11, A whatever, normal magazine size paper, pure white. About a third of the way down, dead center, was a shattered bottle of Crown Royal whiskey. And underneath it, it just said, "Grown men do cry." They didn't try to tell you the whiskey was great. They didn't try to tell you tasting notes. They didn't say, hey, go buy this whiskey. Your friends are good. They didn't try to tell you a huge story. In one line, "Grown men do cry because that bottle is broken." They told you everything that you needed for that particular scenario. And I always think about that with podcasting, with video, and with photography. And that is, you have to know the story and the audience that you're talking to.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's definitely true. Also, I think when you do something like a YouTube channel, for example, especially when you're creating educational content, just making 1 or 2 videos, that's really only the very tip of the iceberg. Really, when it gets interesting is when once you in a position where you've created a whole body of work, and then people can dive in. I mean, think Flurn, for example, right? Do you remember that YouTube channel? Photoshop.
Yeah,
learning,
Aaron Nace.
Aaron Nace, yeah. The beauty of that is that there's like gazillions of videos, and once you get into that channel, you just never come out again. You know, you
Right.
just bounce from
And
one
by the
video to the
way,
next.
Aaron Nace may be one of the best Photoshop instructors that there is,
Exactly.
and he gives a
Exactly.
ton of it away for free, but also has a subscription model.
Yeah, you know, the beauty of Fluent Pro is, I think is what it's called. You know, what I really love about that is that, you know, I think many people have had the same experience. Certainly for me, when I first started sort of learning Photoshop on YouTube, and actually, you know, I've used Photoshop even, I mean, for a long time before YouTube even ever existed. But really, when things like Fluent popped up on YouTube, that's when I really got into the weeds with it, because all of a sudden there was all this content out there, and you know, all the things I'd done up to this point. I think I was just ready to really get into it and you know, continue learning at that point. Um, but one of the things that happens a lot of the time is you use a platform like YouTube, and you watch one video, and then you bounce to another video, and then you watch another video, and you might, you know, watch a video about an aspect of skin retouching, and then the next video is something to do with how to replace skies, and then the next video is like how do you change a color on a car or something, you know, and so on and so forth. Um, and the problem is that there's so much content out there, and what it lacks is structure. And if you think about it, any traditional learning platform, let's call them learning platforms, like universities, colleges,
Right.
schools, use curricula. And a curriculum is basically an organized string of progressive lessons that will take you from point A to point B. So let's say from novice or total beginner to pro. But there's like, you know, there's a pathway that where every lesson, every bit that you learn, like Lego bricks, build on top of each other. And if you design a curriculum, that's how you design a curriculum. You know, you basically start with the simple things, and you go into more detail, and you make them more, and that leads to other concepts. And in order to understand those concepts, you have to really be the master of, or you would have had to master some of the basic concepts already. And so you build on your knowledge. And that's the problem with YouTube per se, is that it's very difficult, if not, you know, nigh impossible, to create that structure when you're just looking at the vast sea of YouTube videos that there are. Which is why when you have something like, you know, like Fluent or Piximperfect or something like that, where you have like a massive number of, a huge amount, bulk of content, is that then you have a way to structure that. And that's where Fluent Pro comes in, you know, and concepts like
Yep.
that, where you basically then create learning paths. And that's what, when I spoke to Aaron about that, that's the one thing I really love the most, is that what he's basically done is he's basically taken very specific aspects of photo retouching. For example, let's say skin retouching, right? You know, or portrait retouching, and he's broken it down into skin retouching, hair retouching, you know, clothes retouching, whatever. And he's basically turned them into progressive learning paths that you can now follow, and you can do one lesson and then do the next lesson. That one builds on the first one. And so you, in no time at all, increase your skill level to the point where you can be, or you can become really very competent at doing this particular aspect of, you know, retouching work. And that's really worth it. And, you know, I know often, you know, people say like, oh, well, but why should I pay for it if, you know, if I can have it for free? But the problem is, when you dive into the vast ocean of YouTube, your basic problem is that in the beginning, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know what you don't know, then you need a guide to tell you what you don't know. And that's
Right.
that's what teachers are, essentially. Teachers are just people that tell you what you don't know, and then they tell you what you don't know, you know.
And on YouTube, you know, arguably that's what playlists have the capability of being, is to walk you through videos in a certain order. The problem is the algorithm, in my opinion, doesn't utilize playlists on a suggestion point of view. They utilize videos on a suggestion point of view, and what you end up with is a disjointed learning path. And again, going to what you said, if you only know what you know, and if you don't know something, you don't know you need to know it. I remember when I used to teach Microsoft certified systems engineer courses for a computer company, and one of my early classes was some kind of, at the time it was Windows NT 4.1. I mean, we're talking a long time ago. And I had these people, the company I worked for, Executrain at the time, we taught almost nothing but Fortune 500, Fortune 100 type employees. And I had a room of 12 employees that were high-end IT people for Fortune level employees. And it was the first time I was teaching this particular class. It was, I don't know, it was network admin or something, or group policy or something, I forget. And I went to the owner of the company and I went, I'm nervous as hell, because these people have real jobs with real problems on real servers, and I'm teaching them. And he looked at me and he goes, but you know the manual, and they don't. And they've seen the outline of what's in the manual, and they're here because they don't know what's in the manual. And when he said the outline of the manual part, it really struck a chord with me, kind of what you just said. And that is, you need to follow a logical path through any learning, because if you skip one step in that logical path, that could be a hole in your learning that you may never fill, because now you think you understand, system A, without knowing you're missing a piece. And one of my first introductions to Aaron Nace, who's also been on my show, was, I think it was color grading. It was something having to do with composite images, where he had like 20 layers and color grading to make all those layers match. And the way he walked through that was just as important as what the content was, right? What topic he introduced, what layer he introduced where, really affected the end result outcome of you being able to assemble this and make disparate shots match what you needed. I wish that more people understood sometimes that searching YouTube for how to repair a hole in your drywall is, we all understand it's going to give us 100 results, of which 96 are crap and 4 of them are good content. I'll restructure that. 96 of them are crap. 2 of the other 4 are great content presented so badly that you can't watch it. Right?
That's true.
Or with bad audio or whatever. And then maybe 1 or 2 of those results are both good content, presented well and recorded well. The problem is finding the good ones on YouTube has become super, super difficult. I don't know about you. I see photography content on YouTube. I'm not going to mention any names. I see photography content on YouTube that's got, 24,000, 46,000 views in 24 hours. And I'm like, that's something I want to know. And I go click it and I can't watch it. I don't understand how 46,000 people watched it.
I certainly have not cracked the YouTube algorithm, by a long stretch, which becomes evident when you look at how small, the Camera Shake YouTube channel actually is. It's the thing is, I think the thing with YouTube in general is that the whole point in the algorithm is to keep people on the platform. If you sort of accept that that's ultimately the ultimate goal, for a number of reasons, mainly because then all of a sudden advertising becomes, time becomes more valuable for advertisers and all the rest of it. If you can create a larger audience and keep them, on the platform for longer. Obviously, we all understand that makes perfect sense. I wouldn't really expect anything less from YouTube. And actually, it's the same thing on every social media platform, regardless as to whether it's TikTok or whatever. And
let's say we would do the same thing if we owned it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Why not? That's exactly what you would do. Yeah, completely understandable. But so, for instance, so if the algorithm basically analyzes my behavior on YouTube, it will probably figure, okay, so, Kirsten likes to watch photography-related videos. He also likes guitar-related videos, some dog-related videos, and stuff like that. And so it would basically serve me up a cocktail of the things that it thinks I like. And then, I would watch some photography video. And by the end of that, the algorithm would think like, well, now I'm going to serve him up a interview with Eddie Van Halen from 1981, because I know that he's a sucker for those kind of things. And yeah, and right, and so I am, and because I did this It's an interesting thing actually. So I've been following some politics, American politics, fairly closely for a number of reasons. But basically,
Run
so
away, run away now.
yeah, right away, exactly, yeah. But so what happens is, by the nature of the topics that I've been interested in, I've predominantly been watching very particular news outlets of American broadcast. So for instance, so if I turn my YouTube on, it would come up with CNN newscasts and Times Radio, which is also sort of left leaning,
Right,
let's say.
right.
And so I get served up all of that, but I won't get served up any of the opposing content. So, and I'm a firm believer that if you want to make a concern, if you want to really come to some kind of conclusion or create like a balanced opinion, you really need to take in both sides, and then evaluate and at least understand what the opposing side or the other side is, what their argumentation is, and why they think the way they think. It's important to understand that because it informs you on your own opinions and all the rest of it. And sometimes
Exactly.
it's very valuable to question yourself as well. And you go like, well, yeah, what it's like. So, but I don't get served that at all. I don't get served that balance at all when I turn on YouTube. I just really get one side. And so it's easy to believe that everyone thinks the same way because that's the only thing I see. So on purpose, I've started to watch some other news outlets that would be sort of the opposing ilk. Like I don't know, dare I mention Fox News or something. I watch some of those
Right.
because I just want to see what the opposing side has, what their opinions are. And it's really interesting because I put this in comparison to European media. And although I have to say that British media are also very biased one way or another, I think on the whole, they're still more balanced than the impression that I get with American news media. So it's really
I would
interesting to
agree.
see how super separated they are. I mean, it's really interesting. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's interesting to see to acknowledge the difference basically.
One of the
But
problems with that YouTube algorithm is it, at least in my experience, it leans heavy on the last thing you watched.
yes,
So, for example, with the remodel that we're doing at our Vegas place, I've done a ton of drywall in my life, but there was something I was doing, and I just wanted to watch some videos and see if I could get better at whatever this drywall technique was. So I pulled up one or two videos to watch it, and next thing I know, in my recommended feed, it's one photography video, and then how to use, what's the difference in a drill and an impact drill, and what's the difference in paper tape versus mesh tape for drywall, and should you use drywall topping or should you use a hot mud, and then another photography video, and it leans so heavy on that if I end up watching one video that is out of the norm for me, then I go back the next day going, okay, show me some whiskey YouTube channels or show me some photo channels, and I can't get those. I get nothing but what's in a toolbox.
yeah, that's exactly the
And
point I was
that's
trying to
part of
make.
the problem you're
Yeah.
describing.
Yeah, exactly. So I watched a couple of Fox News videos, and then all of a sudden, like this morning, I turn on my YouTube and it's all Fox News, and I'm like, wait a
All
minute,
Fox News.
what happened there?
Which and I that's fascinating actually to me. That to me you could do an entire hour conversation on
Mm.
in what makes you think the fact that I saw one thing suddenly negates 80% of what you know from years of my history, that you're negating that because he's onto this now. Because I kind of do the same thing. I see a lot of disparate news channels, CNN, MSNBC. I'll watch a little Fox. It's hard for me, but I'll do it because I want to know. And I used to joke that, look, even when you watch those periodically, the fact that you don't like that side of the aisle doesn't mean they don't have a good idea now and then, right? And you can hear some stuff that makes you think differently. What's fascinating to me is, and relates to the YouTube thing, is when you watch the left side versus the right side, and the left side is talking about something that's in the news, or to be fair, one of them is talking about something that's really big in the news, and the other one doesn't want their viewers to know about it. And therefore, if you watch them on the same day, these people are talking about a dog park while these people are talking about a court case in the Supreme Court. It's kind of the same thing. They're running something to try and appease the viewers they've got.
Of course. And you find this
Oh
even
man, are
here in
the
the
comments
UK.
going to come in on this?
So, but it's similar over here in the UK. And like I said earlier, I think sort of on balance, news outlets here are still more balanced. I mean, they're still biased, heavily biased, but they're just not quite as extremely biased, I would say. But the
Right.
one thing I've noticed all the time, because obviously I occasionally, when there's like a world event going on, like yet another war that the UK is involved in, for example, right, which seems to be like a lot of wars. Then what I tend to do is, it's always good for me to just have a look at how the same thing is being reported over in Europe. So I'll watch German news, for example, right? And so the interesting thing, this is one of the major differences I always find, it's when you've got some war going on, like whether it's in Syria or Afghanistan or wherever else, right? Wherever in the world that the UK troops are yet again involved in doing something, right? For the right reasons, I'm sure, but nevertheless, they always have to get involved in everything. Somebody says war, we're going in. That's like woohoo.
Invitation. Yeah.
Yeah. It's got to keep those minds sharp. I don't know. Anyway, so but then of course the news that you get over here on the BBC or on like on Sky News, they're going to have a particular attitude or a particular opinion and a particular way of describing events because we have troops involved. So they would, for instance, talk about,
Right.
there'd be like long newscasts about strategy and battlefield news. And this is, this battalion has gone there and then the enemy is there. And then, and the this and that, whatever. It's more of the kind of the technical kind of side of things. And then when you switch over to German news, it's very interesting because they cover a lot of human stories. So on British news, you might hear about how this battle went, or like how many targets got destroyed, and this and then the other. And then you switch to German news, and they'll be talking about how civilians are fleeing, and how they've run out of water, and how they've run out of food, and how 8 organizations are trying to get help in, and they would have like, let's say, reporters embedded on the ground, but rather than necessarily following the military, they'll be following the civilians, and just so you get a human story. And what it of course does is it does shape your opinion on things. You watch the military side of things, the technical side of things, and it sort of dehumanizes it. And you forget that actually every time they drop a bomb on some building, there may be like X amount of civilians in there that now may suffer for whatever reason, even if they weren't even involved in the whole thing. And and so it's I find it interesting. I find it important to kind of get that balance a little bit, so you don't lose the humanity, when it comes to those things. And it's very similar with like political things. I noticed that our former prime minister of like 30 days or whatever, Liz Truss, she brought a book out, and of course now in order to promote her book went over to the US, and she's obviously talking to all the sort of right-wing news outlets. It's hilarious.
We have jokes here for some of the politicians, like not a politician really, but somebody who served in the administration under Trump, Anthony Scaramucci, who lasted X number of days. And so somebody started a Twitter channel with a head of lettuce. And so the thing is, when somebody takes a certain position, which is going to last longer, the head of lettuce,
Yeah.
or this person? It's so fascinating though, because when I was overseas, and I would say to people, what's your opinion of what's happening in the U.S.? And I wouldn't say it as much, and I don't mean this is in a bad way. I wouldn't say it as much in the sense of I want their opinion on U.S. politics or U.S. policy or anything like that. It was, they're going to tell me what they've been presented with, right? They're going to tell me what they've seen on the news where they live, which quite often is a much more tight, succinct presentation from an uninterested third-party point of view. And it can be very fascinating to see how people, like you say, in different geographical areas, perceive something happening as a world event. Which, again, I always take this back to, I think it's one of the problems that we have today in photography. In my genre of photography, music photography, I see a lot of photographers out there that are, well liked on Instagram, and they've got, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 followers. Again, I'm not meaning this as an insult to them and their craft, but their pictures universally are bad composition, whatever. It's a cool picture with cool light of a cool performer, but it doesn't tell a story at all. Objectively, I understand, right? Again, you're creative, make the art that's your voice. I would never go anywhere else. If you're a creative, it's your voice, your creative voice that you need to express. And if that's your creative voice, more power to you. But I'm just talking from a generalized point of view that, to me, you still need to tell the story, like a news channel or like an entertainment channel or an entertainment outlet or whatever it is. Photographs have always been a frozen moment in time, not for the mere purpose of freezing a moment, right? I can freeze a moment on CNN by hitting the pause button. Inevitably, even when it's not somebody jumping in the air, swinging hair, and playing a guitar, when it's a talking head on a news channel doing this much movement at best, and I hit the pause button, freezing them at a point where they look attractive and it's flattering to them by hitting a pause button is very difficult. Freezing a
That's
moment of a
impossible.
real moving human and having them not look like that is difficult. So if you're going to take the time as a photographer to freeze a moment in time, freeze a moment that says something about that moment, that environment, that person, that story. And I think it's one of the problems that we see on YouTube. I think it's one of the problems we see in news. News no longer is news, really. It's
Mm.
opinion. With a few exceptions. You can't generalize everything. And bringing it back to the photography side of things, I think it's one of the problems also in our world, where photographers are going out there and shooting cool things. And I always think of Scott Kelby when he, on his critique shows, somebody would put up a very beautiful shot of a flower, but it's a flower.
Yeah.
And Kelby would say, "Look, this thing on the stem was beautiful. If you're going to freeze it in time and take a picture of a flower, it better be a damn pretty flower, or there's no purpose to this." And it's kind of the same thing to me. We in all of these genres need to tell a story, and in some cases, the person pulling the trigger on which story are we going to tell is coloring that story. Which way do we point the lens? Are we going to cover the human aspect on the German news, or are we going to cover the tactical aspect on the British news? Are we going to use a wide angle lens so that we can see that there really aren't any protesters outside? Or are we going to use a 200 lens to make it look like the 3 protesters is 100? We're all making those choices. If you're not, arguably, you're kind of doing it wrong.
Yeah. And do you think that the advancement of technology and if we're talking specifically concert photography for a second, so the advances in technology, like the ability of of cameras to function or create like much better imagery in low light situations, for example,
Right.
increased megapixel counts or whatever, all the rest of it. Do you think that has actually almost hindered people's ability to focus on the storytelling, because the focus is so removed from that now, and it's the focus is all on the technical aspect of the image making and the final result, where it's almost like more important that there's no grain in the image, rather than, because I'm thinking, if I was a concert photographer in the 80s, for example, shooting on film, where the technology, the technological aspect of it would have been so limited in comparison to now, where I would have, I mean, the entire focus then would have been on the storytelling because there's really not much you can do other than choosing the right roll of film.
I
Do you know what I mean? Do you?
100% agree. And in some ways, I would word it like this. The 80s example is perfect. So I grew up at a point in a time where the most iconic pictures of my life, literally the most iconic pictures of my life, photos from Vietnam, photos of Muhammad Ali, photos of, whatever, moon landing, whatever, are the noisiest things you've ever seen. And nobody ever looks at them and goes, man, a lot of noise in that image, right? Because the story overrides that. Rick Salmon used to say, and I think it was his dad that originally said it to him, if the first thing somebody notices in your image is the noise, there's something else wrong with your image, which is so true. And we used to distinguish between professional photographers that use professional gear and point and shoots that were used by consumers to snap snapshots of their family or their vacation. And to me, the difference was not the point and shoot versus the DSLR or the SLR in the film days. It wasn't the gear, while there is a difference in the gear. It was the attitude, the mental approach behind it. When you had a point and shoot, you were a dad that just wanted to shoot your family sitting in front of a Christmas tree. When you were a professional photographer photographing a family in front of a Christmas tree, you thought about it, right? You did it with intent. And that intention to me was the difference. And that's what's happening now is going to concert photography. I'm going to hear so much crap over this. I should shut up. What's happening now is, wow, Steve, you're really judgmental. No, I don't mean it that way, but okay. But what's happening now is we have cameras that are so good that you can walk into a room where you need to shoot at 2.8. You're lucky to get 1/25th of a second or 1/60th or 200th of a second, even though you have people leaping in the air that you can't freeze maybe at 125th of a second at 24 millimeters. And your camera can grab that focus and keep it on the eye, and their feet and their hands or their drumsticks or whatever may be blurry, but their face may be sharp. And what that's done is make it to where you don't have to have as much intent. You don't have to have as much forethought. And it's become somewhat of a point and shoot, right? Okay, I'm in a photo pit. I got the credentials. I pointed at the guy. He jumps in the air. I shoot. Now I'm going to get the shot. And I would argue, I wish that ease of getting a successful photo or more hits should give you more time to think about, is there a microphone stand coming out of his head?
Yeah.
Right?
And
Or where's the bright light? Is half the bright light here, or is it behind him giving him a nice backlight? Think about those frames within a frame, or look, break all the composition rules you want. But if you are of the mindset, which I think a lot of photographers are today, that they're not rules, they're guidelines, I don't have to follow them, I can break them. If you're of the mindset that those don't exist because of years and years of understanding what makes a human flow through a photo and attach onto a subject and make the subject and the storyline work, just like Rembrandt lighting versus butterfly lighting, putting somebody always in the dead center of a photo or in a weird place, or having them face out of the frame as opposed to into the frame, what a Dutch angle is for. Ignore them all if you want, but if you don't take the time to understand those benefits and use the ease of the technological side today to enhance that, I would argue you need to revisit some thinking.
Yeah, and I always think like, back in the days of film, for example, where you had 36 shots on a roll of film.
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't, let's say you'd go and shoot a concert, like how many rolls of films would you use, let's say, on average during a concert? I don't know, Probably not that
I
many.
never shot concerts with film, but I would guess maybe 3.
Yeah, maybe. So if you think
Because
about
you'd
how
probably
many,
shoot one roll per song, and even then, at a certain point, starting late 70s, I think it was, or 80s, I think it was 80s. Even then, you got 3 songs at a certain point.
yeah.
So
So let's, yeah. So you come away with 100 shots, let's say, overall, right? Um, I mean, nowadays, in the world of, at the time of digital photography, of course, you shoot thousands of shots, and so it's almost like you're not necessarily too concerned about the storytelling aspect because you just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot, and then out of those 1,000 shots, you might deliver 10. There's bound to be some halfway decent work in there, and I've realized that with
yeah,
the boxing events that I shoot. So when I first started shooting those, I used to go in and I used to like literally, set my camera to rapid fire and I'll just fire away and I'll just create tons of images. I'd come home with like 4,500 shots, right? And then I'd have to go through all of them and it would take absolutely forever just to cull. Um, and yeah, and it took a really long time. And the skill that I've developed, I think over the last 3 or 4 years or something is basically I can now go and instead of shooting 5 or 6 very rapid frames, I'll just, I'll have my camera set to single shot and I basically hit the shutter button twice. It's like double tapping basically. I just go doom doom and then, I wait for the next thing. But I wait for the thing to happen that I'm looking for. Like let's say if I need a close-up shot of one of the boxes, I'm waiting for that head to be just in the right position. So I've learned to wait and to shoot less. And so what's happening is actually my hit rate is much higher. The overall amount of photos that I come home with is much lower. And the amount of time that I spend culling and going through those is considerably reduced. I mean, I spend a fraction of the time on it now compared to when I first started doing that. And that's really just because I've almost like developed a film mentality, with a digital camera when it comes to shooting those events because the minute I come home with 4,500 shots and I have to go through all of those, at that point I'm really losing money. It's not worth my time anymore because I'm spending so much time, editing stuff and going through it.
I completely agree. Now, I shoot 3 to 5 shot bursts when I need a burst. And the reason is this. If somebody's jumping in the air, a lot of times, or singing and doing pulling back from a microphone and doing a scream. If I shoot a 3-shot burst, sometimes the first shot loses focus as they pull back or they jump. The last shot might as they come down. One of the middle shots is usually going to be the hit. But the other thing is it gives me the ability to choose the most flattering facial expression at that moment. And when I've shot fight sports, which I've as well done, karate, Muay Thai, MMA, whatever, a lot of Muay Thai, it's kind of the same thing. So one of my big things when I shoot fights, it's really hard to do, and I do it as a personal challenge, is to get both faces. Well, inevitably, if both people have standard stances where left foot forward, let's say, right? Just like in skateboarding, you have goofy foot or not, right? If they're both left foot forward, then inevitably, if I catch the person on the left's face, it's because I'm on their right side, their right foot is back, they're slightly turned towards me. The other person, their left foot's forward, there's a little bit of the back of their shoulder towards me. It's really hard to get both faces. And I don't always do it, but that's one of my internal goals because I think it's a stronger shot if I can see both fighters. By shooting a small burst, I have a higher ratio of getting the composition that I want, but a higher chance of having fewer hits.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm willing to trade that. But finding that balance, like in music photography, as a guitarist, you'll understand this. So in music photography, you need ear protection, right? I'm in the photo pit, which is right next to the stage, and the crowd is behind me. I'm in the area where security is that keeps people from climbing up on the stage usually. And I switched from the old foam that you squeeze them and put them in your ear and they expand and close off all the sound, and everything sounds muffled all the way across. I switched from those years and years ago to custom molded earplugs that have adjustable, you can take out or put in different modifiers to reduce the sound by 9 or 15 or 25 dB. I keep 25 dB attenuators in there. And it changed the way I shoot, because now everything is lowered pretty evenly 25 dB. I can actually hear, but I can hear safely for a longer extended period of time. So I can hear when the singer is about to go to a crescendo, or when the guitarist is doing something and I know they're going to jump in the air. So it's enabled me to anticipate better so that I can shoot a burst when it happens, but a shorter burst. And so a show where I would have gone home with 1,500 shots, I may go home with 700 now, simply because I have a better sense of when to shoot a burst.
Yeah.
That's where technology comes in handy. And, with fights, one of the big problems to me on fights, especially local fights, is people don't realize when you're sitting next to a ring, it looks pretty bright. When you have a camera, unless you're talking, HBO boxing, when you're talking smaller venue, smaller fight promotion fights, those rings can be frickin' dark.
Yeah. I mean,
Right?
it's one of the biggest problems. Yeah. And not only that, especially, so over the last couple of years, the last 3 years or something, a lot of the lighting on those rings has changed to LED lighting. And
Banding?
occasionally you get these like really terrible LEDs that basically flicker, right? And so I've shot fights where every other frame was black.
Yep.
It was just like, and then you have to go through it, and so it's absolutely terrible. But yeah, I mean, it's very inconsistent lighting usually. Either it's too dark, and then of course you've got the problem. The problem is you can't shoot with flash, especially on ringside. What I would do is I would have a speed light for when the fighters come into the arena, but then I shoot the fight without a speed light, so at least I can get some decent shots of them walking up to the ring, But yeah, lighting in the ring is always a problem. Actually, I shot one fight last weekend in a particular venue where I know that just the venue lights are actually fine, and I can shoot the whole thing, without any flash, which just saves on my wrist. Because that's the other thing, when you're using the flash sometimes when fighters are coming in, and then you turn it off for when you're actually shooting the actual fight. You have to keep the flash on the camera all the time, which basically adds to the weight, and you're lifting the camera up quite a lot throughout the whole evening, and it really gets into your wrist, and it's just the added weight makes it a lot more uncomfortable to shoot. But yeah, lighting is a massive issue with those kind of events, like all the time.
Especially with what you said, the LED lights. So
LEDs are terrible.
in concerts, when you have cheap LED lights and the recycle rate is such, and keep in mind, you could have technically a light that's recycling at 60 cycles a second here in the US, 50 cycles a second in the EU. But at the same time, you could also have a foreign light that's plugged in here. There's all kinds of weird things that you can have happen. If you end up with banding, the usual thing is you need to lower your shutter down below the recycle rate. But when I'm shooting a fight, strangely, I can freeze somebody jumping. You give me I prefer to go 400th, 1/400th, 1/500th of a second. But if I have to, if I'm at 250th or 200th or whatever, I'll find a way to make it work. You cannot freeze a punch at 200th of a second. You can freeze a face.
Yeah.
But that boxing glove is going to be a complete blur. And if you want to get that point of impact where you see the ripple in the skin, you need some shutter speed for that. So what do you, I'm curious, when you shoot fight sports, what's your preferred, if you, in a perfect world, Kirsten owns the world, what's your perfect lighting to get, what's your shutter speed that you would love to have?
So the maximum I usually get to with the lighting that I normally deal with is 1/800. That's sort of the top at where I can get. Anything above
Which
that,
is fast enough.
which is fast enough most of the time. Most of the time. You have like some guys when they're super frantic, you see a little bit of motion blur in the glove still at 1/800, but it doesn't occur as regularly as if you're shooting at 1/500,
Right.
for example, or something.
Football, people who shoot the NFL want 1/1000th of a second minimum.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal situation, I would basically say 1/1000, 1200, something like that. You would definitely freeze stuff at that point. A 1/800 is very good, but you got to be really lucky if you can actually shoot at that shutter speed. There are events that I shoot where you won't go over 320 or something. It's just impossible. And so what I tend to do is it's a little bit, well, I don't know if it's controversial, but that's just how I do it, and it works really well for me. Is I set my ISO to auto ISO, and I set a limit to 6400, and that on my camera works really well, because what it basically means is it gives me an even exposure across all of my images, and it makes editing so much easier. Like I
Right.
virtually have to do almost zero exposure adjustment afterwards, because
I'm not an auto ISO guy.
so
And for fights, I could see it. I don't think I'd use it for concerts.
no,
For
not for
fights, for
concerts.
me, my average shutter speed's probably 1/400th.
Yeah.
And I would, in a perfect world, if I could get 1/600th, and I'm tracking properly,
Yeah.
I can get a lot of hits out of it. But I'm
So
lucky to get 1/400th. And
yeah, so
and
the
I
thing is,
hate
like,
venues where the ceiling's low, so the
yeah,
lights, instead of being up pointing down, are actually behind the fighter's head. That screws
yeah.
everything up.
So the typical setup for the kind of events that I shoot is that they have LEDs on poles on opposite sides of the ring. So you essentially have usually four lights, like a set of two lights on one side of the ring, and then on the other. And so basically, I make sure that when I'm shooting, I'm really only shooting from two angles, and that's basically where the light is. So I'm kind of shooting into the light. But what it means is that when I'm shooting a face, that face is lit by the light that's literally above me, right? When I go to the other two corners of the ring, I get a lot of cross shadows potentially, and then it's a little bit more annoying. And what it means is more shadows means that I lose detail in those, and it's just
Yep.
it has an impact on the quality of the images that I can produce. So this is just sort of my my go-to moves essentially. So I make sure that I can position myself and I can get onto the ring. So I can literally be on top of the ropes. So that's how much access I have. So I don't have to shoot from below the ring. I can literally be up right on top, to the point where I've actually had my camera pushed into my face by somebody who's just come too close and just touched the lens. That has happened. So I'm literally that close to it. But yeah, so the position is important. The shutter speed, it really is just dictated by how much light you actually have. And because, especially with boxing fights, things happen so fast that very often you don't actually have the opportunity to look at your light meter in the camera and then adjust your shutter speed. I mean, even if it's just a thumb flick, there just isn't time. So
Right.
auto ISO basically gets you out of the fix of having to do that, because otherwise, and I used to shoot like this, and so what would happen would be you get a lot of shots that are really usable, absolutely, but you'd have to go in and then just adjust the exposure from just a little bit from one shot to the next, like maybe a quarter of a stop or half a stop or whatever, up or down, and it would just take time in editing. So I need to basically deliver anywhere between 500 and 900 shots for each event.
Wow.
Yeah, so I need to basically, first of all, cull images, and then I have to edit between 500 to 900 shots. So I've devised this system where I can literally edit a shot literally in 3 seconds flat, probably under 3 seconds, and deliver them in the right format, and they're absolutely usable, sellable shots. But what it means is that my exposure has to be pretty much on point for all of those shots, so that I don't fiddle around with any sliders really at that point. That's the only way I can do
Here's
it.
one of my issues with auto ISO, and that is it's great until, like you say, if you turn the right way and the light over you is exposing the fighter's face.
Mhm.
But depending on your metering system, like the Nikon Canon thing, if there is a backlight to him and the camera catches that light and decides based on metering. For example, one of the
Oh,
big things is unless you have a 1 series Canon, people don't know this. A lot of people still don't know this, which shocks me because it's a big deal to me. Unless you have a 1 series on the Canon side, spot metering is always in the center. So if you move your
oh,
focus point up and to the right and you put that on somebody's face, but the center point, when I put that on their face, the center point is now in a black area behind them or on a bright light, it's going to meter to the bright light and darken the image down.
and that, my
Whereas on a
friends, is
Nikon,
yeah,
Nikon, the top like 3, 4, 5 bodies, spot metering follows the focus point.
and that, my friends,
And
is exactly
so
why I shoot Nikon. Exactly, exactly that.
exactly. And
Yeah.
the same with concert photography. I'm a Canon shooter, but Nikon people, you can always tell if they're on YouTube teaching concert photography and they say, you want spot metering. On a Canon, no, you don't. Because
Yeah.
again, I when I do my workshops, I have shots where I overlay like a fake, focus point thing on a
Mm.
scene and show you where my focus point was, which is close to their eye, if not on their eye. And metering is on the back of the stage, which was pure black if I had spot
Yeah.
metering on. So there's obviously there's issues with camera brand when you do that, but one of one of my favorite things with fight photography is the environment is so exciting and so fun. I remember one time it was a Muay Thai fight. I think it was WCK or something. And we had set kind of positions we had to sit. And I was right next to one of the judges. Super nice guy, talked a little bit. And periodically the ring's here, you're sitting down, you can't stand up because you block the row behind you. And so I'm kind of leaning forward, trying to shoot between ropes. And at one point, one of the California rules officials, because these are all sanctioned fights, and you have a sports entity that oversees this, came over and said, I'm going to kick you out if you block that judge. And the judge looked at him and went, he's not blocking, I'm fine. And this person wouldn't back down. It's like, if you lean forward again, I'm kicking you out of here. And I love that type of excitement that you get from shooting. The same thing happens in concerts. That you get because all of that adds to what you're trying to do in the camera as you're worried about a California official kicking you out because you leaned forward too far.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a funny thing. It takes a while. I watch so many other photographers shooting boxing because very often there are events where there's 2 rings and then there's one photographer per ring, basically. And so I watch other photographers do what they do, and it's not that they just do it differently. It's not that they get any worse imagery or whatever. I'm not saying that, but everybody has like their own way of doing things. Some people lock their ISO and then write the shutter speed, which works just as well. I've just streamlined the process
That's
to the
my
point.
style, by the way.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I shoot concerts. Exactly. But for boxing, because I need to deliver so many, the turnaround time is so quick. Like I need to deliver those shots. I need to deliver all of those shots within 48 hours. They need to be up on the website because the reason why I'm there in the first place is because they essentially sell those images. These events are basically partially a part of a charity. And so the idea really is that those shots go up on the website, and then people who fought in the events or their family, whatever, can go and buy those images. So they have to be up really quickly. So my turnaround time has to be under 48 hours, which basically means I go and shoot this event. I come back the following day. I need to get the stuff edited, and get it out and delivered, basically. So I'm not creating art. My intent is to create shots that sell. That's one thing. So I sort of in my head I have a shot list of particular shots that I have to create, and I also because it's a question of, well, first of all, because I'm not creating art, and it's a question of how much time can I realistically spend on this until I start losing money, essentially. It's also a commercial decision. So, but the question ultimately is like, how good is good enough? That's a really important thing to bear in mind, because I could go in and do a full-on edit on a lot of these shots, and it would take me absolutely flipping forever. But given that I have to deliver so many shots, I can't do that. I have to actually streamline the process, and the process starts with the taking of the image. So when I'm there, so for instance, which is where the auto ISO comes in now. So my thinking is this: first of all, I have to create shots that are fairly even as far as the exposure is concerned, and if I'm happy. I've set my camera to 6400 ISO because as a limit, because I'm quite happy with the quality that I still get at that rate. It doesn't mean that all of my images come out at 6400. In fact, the minority of images probably will. Most of them will probably live around 3200, 2500, somewhere in that sort of range. But 6400 is basically the kind of the cutoff point.
Right.
You know, so what that means is that some images will be probably coming out at 1600, some will be coming out at 2500, some will be coming out at 3200. All of that's fine with me. I don't worry about any of that. I do the most basic of noise reduction across all the shots at the end, and I'm not really worried about that at all, because I know that the thing that sells is the impression on the fighter's face, the stance, the overall position, you know, where the gloves are, whether there's impact, that sort of thing. That is the thing that is going to sell the photo at the end. And it's like you said, you know, I'm not concerned whether there's a little bit of noise or not, because actually with modern camera bodies, I know there won't be a lot of noise, you know. And the other thing is, of course, when they buy those shots, they get prints delivered, and these prints are 5x7s. Like they're not,
You're not going
you
to show
know,
it.
yeah. I mean, so I don't really have to worry about those things. So all of that, these sort of considerations help me to basically create a workflow that allows me to make sense of this event, and actually me getting paid and it making sense in that respect. You know, I'm not spending like days editing, because that's certainly what happened when I first started this, like, you know, 4 years ago or something. I spent way too much editing, way too much time editing. It was really not cost effective for me to do that, you know. But I have to get to the point, of course, nowadays where, you know, I do this event, I have everything pushed. Normally what happens is I shoot the event, and the next day by noon, I've got all the shots delivered, and then I'm done. I've got this out of the door, and I can move on to the next thing.
My turnarounds are similar when I shoot for a venue, and what I always tell people is just be aware of what your output is.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
If you are editing a picture for your portfolio, yes, you're going to put more time into it.
Different
If you're
thing,
editing the
completely, yeah.
picture for a client, that can be a couple different things. So when I shoot for a venue, usually before I leave the venue, this is going to happen Friday night when I shoot Luis Miguel. Before I leave the venue, usually they want 5 or 10 photos for social media. They want to post them right then, as people are either still there, because I'm done shooting before the concert's over, while people are still there, or while people, you know, are getting home, to let them know what they saw, or other people who didn't go, what they missed. Then the next day, I get them the photos in bulk that are edited more. So I may pick, let's say I pick 10 photos to give to them. I'll edit them, a quick edit there at the arena. I'll airdrop them. So I'll export them as, you know, 1,000 pixels or 2,000 pixels. I'll airdrop them from my Mac to their phone so that they're ready to go on their phone. One of the things I do that a lot of people don't is, if they want their watermark on them, I have their watermark pre-built into my software. When I export them, their watermark goes on. And they're on their phone, ready to go. They can post them on socials very, very easily. Then I go home, and even those ones I've already given them, I'll cull now everything, get down to a select group I'm going to go through to edit, which as I edit, usually, you know, a lot of times will then be cut in half. Some shots I'm like, I think I can do something with that. I get in there and go, I can't. But I will then lower that down to the final deliverables, and those get put up to Dropbox. I send them a link, and even the original 10 shots that I gave them are in that second batch at whatever resolution the final delivery of products goes at, and they've been edited again on a color calibrated monitor, which my laptop's color calibrated too, but still on my two big 27-inch monitors, where I can check things with a more critical eye than sitting in a conference room somewhere. Um, and the same thing, I usually turn those around the next day. When I photographed for one of the casinos years ago, I was their house photographer and I used to shoot the meet and greets. So it was an
Mm.
Indian casino and it's owned by the tribe members. And so for every show, there would be meet and greets with the artists, which were all of the tribe members. And those shots were kind of like what you're talking about. Those were going to be printed at 5x7. They were on camera flash, right? I didn't have time. We were in the room where they had the buffet for all of the crew to eat. And they were usually in there eating while I was doing these meet and greet photos. And there were times I mean, Bruno Mars, there must have been, 300 meet and greet photos.
Oh, wow.
When I shot Ghost one time, I had probably close to 200 to 300 meet and greet photos. Well, at that point, it's a fixed backdrop. I can set the white balance on one shot and edit it the way that I want it, copy those settings to every photo in there. Now, on occasion, there were variances. I moved a little forward, a little backward, whatever. So then I would go through, crop everything 5x7 as I needed, or adjust the crop as needed, and output those shots very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But you've got to know what your output is. If your output is it's going to be a 5x7 print, and these people don't care that it's a piece of art, they care that they have a picture of themselves with Jerry Seinfeld. That's a
Yeah.
different need than
Exactly.
giving 10 photos to the arena for social media versus giving 50 photos to the arena the next day for archive that they may use in posters or marketing banners around the venue. You got to know your output.
Incidentally, exactly. The output is so important. Incidentally, that's one of my first questions when somebody asks me how much I charge for something. It's my first question is like, what's the output? Because that will determine how much time I spent on things like post-production and stuff. But I'll tell you something funny in terms of workflow. So this is how a typical fight event works, right? So what they do is they do two things with the images. One, of course, all the images after the fight, they go up on this website and people can download and order prints and all that. But at the event, they have one, sometimes two people operating printers. And they create these frames with 5 shots in the frames that they print out right there and then. And they sell them, I don't know how much, like 90 pounds. What is that? About $100 each or something, $110. That people can buy at the event right there and then. They basically just come in, when their fights happen and relatives come to the printing stall and they just order their frame. And then before the end of the night, that frame will be made and finished and ready to go, right? So with every fight, so imagine, so the fights are
So are
shooting.
you shooting JPEG?
Right. So here's what happens, right? Every fight. During a typical event, I'll shoot anywhere typically between 22 and 28 fights that night. Each fight is 3 rounds of 2 minutes each. That's how these fights are set up, right? I shoot to 2 cards. My main card contains all the RAWs. My secondary card retains relatively low res JPEGs. And after every fight, I have a runner who will pick up my SD card and I switch that out for a second SD card on my secondary card slot. Then they will take that card to the printing booth. They will upload the images right there and then. And then after the next fight, that runner will come back and we exchange cards again. So basically, I use card A for the first fight, then card B for the second fight, and I'm back to card A for the third fight, and so on. Right? So that way they get all the images literally almost live. They can basically drop them into Lightroom, do their auto exposure, whatever they do on the JPEGs. That's also one of the reasons why the exposure needs to be fairly consistent, because they don't have the time to do a lot of editing on those. And the images they get there to print and then put into frames, they need to be pretty consistent at that point. And so, so that's how it works. So people can actually buy prints right there. And then after the event, if they want to buy additional images, they can then go on the website and then order more prints after or if they maybe thought that spending $110 on a picture frame is too expensive at that point. But usually what happens is, as it normally is the case with those events, it's basically the black tie events. So there's like tables and dinner and all the rest of it. And as we go through, as the evening progresses, people get more and more, shall I say, lightheaded. Basically people get pissed, which in the UK means drunk. And so, so then they're willing to part with more money as the night progresses. And so, and so they start selling more frames sort of later on. But all of that money actually goes to charity. It goes to cancer charities. So it's they make tons of money. I think they've so far since these events started, like I don't know, 10 years ago or something, they made something like £43 million that went into cancer research just by creating these fight events, which is it's pretty impressive,
And it's a good cause.
It's a really good cause. I mean, people beat each other up for a good cause. So yeah, what else? What else? But it's hilarious. But it's just, from a photographer's point of view, ringside is a pretty high pressure environment because the guys who print the frames, they need very specific shots. Hence, I have a very specific shot list that I have to bear in mind. And I have to make sure I sort of create a balance across those shots so that they can grab all the shots that they need to create the right amount of sort of variety in the frame, with the 5 shots that they'll pick, to also make those as attractive as possible for people to actually want to buy them. That's the thing. So yeah, so it's just all of that going on. Sometimes I have physical runners. Occasionally I have a laptop on my side of the ring that will transmit the images to the printing station, which might be on the other side of the venue or something. It just depends. But yeah, that's kind of how the workflow works there. But like I said, I keep all the raw images, and those are the images that I will then edit at home.
Right.
In my super quick workflow, because it's literally it's a matter of, I figured that in Lightroom, if you keep the crop tool on, you can just basically, in the film strip, you can move on to the next image, and you could just adjust the crop super quickly with like literally one move of your pen on the graphics tablet or something. And then I set up the Stream Deck with a number of functions on different buttons, so I can very quickly just autocorrect something with one. This is literally just one thumb press on the Stream Deck, one little move on the graphics tablet, and I'm on to the next image. So it's, over the years I've streamlined that process.
And because people don't realize, when I come home with, let's say that I cull 800 pictures down to 100 that I'm considering delivering, and I may deliver 30, or I may deliver, 50 or whatever. If you put a minute in to each edit, right, you're now at 1 hour and 40 minutes, and that doesn't include putting the pictures onto the computer, culling them down to that 100 in Photo Mechanic, bringing them into Lightroom and letting Lightroom build its previews, exporting the images at the end, checking those exports, make sure that, they look okay, which I do, uploading them, writing the email to the client saying, hey, here's the link, blah, 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 blah.
Exactly.
It's 1 hour and 40 minutes just on the edit. So you can easily hit, after a show, you can hit 4 hours, 5 hours if you're not careful.
Easily.
And I do often. I've had shows where I'm at 5, 6 hours. By the time I'm done, I get home. By the time I get everything on the computer, I'm editing. And at 5 o'clock, I'm registering the images with the U.S. Copyright Office and sending them to the client. And I go to bed at 6 if I'm not careful. It's happened many, many times.
Exactly. And that's exactly the problem. So, if you think about it, I mean, the reason why I'm like using Stream Deck and I'm using the graphics tablet is because every time I move one fader or I click one button on Lightroom, for example, that's fine for one photo. But the minute I have to deliver 700 shots, that one click turns into 700 clicks. And then you're talking quite a lot of additional time. So now all of a sudden your editing time has gone up by an hour or something, and so it just goes on and on. So it's really just a matter of like streamlining that process as much as I can possibly do, because I get paid a fixed rate, for that event essentially. Nobody cares whether I spend 2 hours editing or 6 hours editing. The fee's the fee. Essentially,
Yeah.
that's it. I'm not getting paid by the hour. So, you know, I have to keep that balance from a commercial perspective. I just have to keep that balance between what is worth my time and what isn't. And like 6 hours editing after an event like this is not worth my time. I wouldn't be able to do it. If yeah.
It's what we said before about knowing your output. When I've judged image competitions, there's always an image that comes up. And my buddy Troy Miller is the first person I ever heard use this phrase. So credit where credit is due. But it's true. In image competitions for local photo groups, they deal with something called merits, which lets them earn merits based on the score of their image that they get, whatever, a pin or whatever. I don't know what it is. But he used to say to somebody, look, don't misunderstand me. You're going to get green merits from this image, meaning the client's going to pay you and be happy, or the mother of the bride is going to pay you and be happy with this image. Doesn't mean it's a good image, right?
No.
Doesn't mean that it's a good image, I should say, for image competition. So I'm not going to merit this image because it shouldn't be, because I can see all of your Photoshop work or whatever it is. It's a landscape image and there's a white halo across all the mountains because you darkened the sky and you didn't mask it properly. And I can see your Photoshop work. I'm not going to merit the image, but you may get green merits for this. And that is the person you shot it for, the client you shot it for. Look, they're going to be happy. They're going to smile. That's their daughter or whatever the case might be. And they're going to pay you for it. And it's one of the same things. When you're editing, you got to understand where the money's coming from. And if what they care more about is get me 900 images by 48 hours from now, and the people that are in those photos, the parent of the fighter or the wife or husband of the fighter, they're going to pay you for these, no problem, and they're going to be super happy with them. I wouldn't put them in your portfolio, maybe.
And they're not. Yeah.
It's a different process.
Yes, that's exactly it. And that's why it's so important, to be clear about the intent behind whatever it is they shoot. That's a situation where I edit super quick, and I've spent a lot of time just refining that process over the years. There are other situations where I spend 6 hours just on one shot, because that's what that particular edit requires, and those would be the kind of images that make it into the portfolio and so on. Or, it depends on the client. Like headshots is a really good example. It really depends on the client. Again, with headshots, time is money, but they're also, different clients have different requirements depending on what it is. Depending on what that image is going to be used for afterwards. Advertising is another really good example where you spend a lot of time, days, weeks, editing advertising shots, because that's just what they require. But again, from a commercial perspective, the remunerations with those sort of jobs is completely different, from shooting a boxing event, for example. It's a completely different kettle of fish. So all of that's being factored in, which is why, again, why I said earlier, one of my first questions whenever, I get a request for a particular job, my first question is always, what is the output?
Right.
Because that will inform me in how much detail I have to put into that particular edit in post-production, for example, or for instance, it might be a thing.
If you're uploading to Instagram at 1,000 pixels, that's completely different than uploading at 2,000 pixels.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, for example, we were talking about ISO earlier. Bergman tends to lock his ISO at 6,400. Yeah. Because as far as he's concerned, now he's shooting stadium and arena shows and the lighting is really, really good. And that gives him the ability to use, if he needs to, a 100 to 500 5.6 lens instead of all 2.8. But he doesn't do any noise reduction. Like, I've talked to him about it. He does zero noise reduction. I'm like, okay, you don't use the new AI noise reduction, but you're sliding the luminance noise, whatever, 10, right? He goes, no, I don't do any noise reduction because nobody sees it. You're taking a 5,000 pixel image and you're dumping it at 1,000 or 2,000 pixels. You're throwing all of that detail away. Yes, your image is still noisy. Nobody's going to see it. Nobody is going to look at that image at 100%. They always say when you do noise reduction, you know, this is not an accurate view unless you're at 100%. You're not actually seeing the noise reduction unless you're at 100%. But nobody else is going to look at your image at 100%.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely right, and that's the thing. So it's, again, the intent or the end output is super important. If you create something that goes on the side of a bus, that's a completely different kettle of fish, as they say, compared to something that ends up on Instagram.
Well, that's a good example. I remember years ago when I first got into photography, we were I think it was Guess. We were in a store looking at clothes for my wife.
Okay.
And they had a wall, picture of a model. And as you walk in, it's this giant model wearing Guess clothes, and it's beautiful. And you walk up to it and you can see every single dot, because the line screen on something printed 10 foot high isn't 300 dots per inch at 150 lines per inch. It's, whatever. It's none of that. It literally looked like, I'm trying to think of the phrase, the old newspaper prints that had dots. It's not
dot matrix.
It's not dot. That's the printer style, but there's an effect that you can put on like cartoons and stuff, and I can't think of the name of it right now.
Yeah.
But it was that. I mean, you walk up to it, and literally there was a 1/4 inch, it felt like, between every dot, 1/8 of an inch between every dot. Because when it's big on a poster, on a wall, on a billboard, nobody's going to see, and nobody ever thinks about it.
Of course.
The way it's going to be viewed, the output you're going to put it at, and where it's going to be used matters greatly. And part of the problem is the people who want to do and I say this being one of them, that in their head want to do a portfolio edit to a social media shot from a soundboard on a badly lit show in an arena at 600 millimeters.
Yeah.
It's a bit overkill.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, that's the thing. But I mean, I think that's one of the things that, that's the bit of expertise that you develop as a photographer as you get better at photography. This is really it's a very important aspect of what it means to be for the lack of a better word, a professional photographer, is to basically know these things. It goes way beyond the actual picture taking or knowing what your, exposure triangle is, all the rest of it. It's thinking about output and, dealing with different post-production styles and workflows and stuff. That's really what makes all the difference, especially once you take that step from doing it as a hobby to doing it as a commercial endeavor, because then that stuff matters, greatly. Especially if you want to keep time management, especially if you want to keep your kids in Netflix. Make sure they can pay for their Duolingo subscription or something, whatever.
Or in my case, make sure you can go buy a console and play Fallout, because I never played Fallout, but I just watched the show. Have you seen it yet?
We're 3 episodes in. I think 3 or 4 episodes in. It's bloody amazing.
The cinematography alone, Walton Goggins as the ghoul is so good.
Yeah.
And we finished the last episode 8, last night. And it just, Saturday night? Must have been Saturday night, because I talked about it on the air yesterday. Oh my God, it's so well done. It makes me want to play the game.
Yeah, it's so good. So we started watching Fallout. We also started watching Halo, which is not quite as good, but it's still better than I thought it would be. Also, obviously, based on the game. It's not because I always, for some reason, I thought it was animated, but it's not. It's live action. So
no, it ain't live action.
Yeah, so that's not bad. But yeah, Fallout is.
I played Halo. I never played Fallout, but the really honestly, the characters are so freaking unique.
Yeah, it's great.
The storyline is unique-ish, unique adjacent. It's so well done. And again, the casting and the writing can ruin a show, obviously, so easily. We've seen a lot of shows that it's like, oh, this should be fantastic, but it's poorly written, poorly directed, poorly assembled, and poorly acted. And in this particular case, the girl who plays Lucy, fantastic.
Yeah.
Walton Goggins, who, if you don't know who Walton Goggins is, go look him up. You've seen him in a ton of different things. Is just perfect in this role.
Have you seen a show called Based on a True Story?
I have not.
Oh my God, I highly recommend it. I can't remember what it's on, whether it's Paramount or I can't remember whether it's Netflix or whatever it is, or maybe Disney. I'm not sure. One of those. So Based on a True Story is a phenomenal concept. And I'm so glad they commissioned the second series of it because it's great. The basic idea is there's right. You'll love it because it's about podcasting, right? So what is it? Basic storyline? There's a serial killer about. I think it's set in L.A. as far as I remember. So there's a serial killer about, and so unrelated to this couple need a plumber to fix the kitchen sink. And the wife is like really into true crime podcasts. Like she's like super addicted to those. And she's like, thinking about setting up her own true crime podcast and all the rest of it. Anyway, so this plumber shows up and fixes the kitchen sink. And for one reason or another, they figure that this guy must be that serial killer. Okay, called the West Side Killer or something. And so they make this guy an offer. They basically say, look, we're not going to the cops, but we want you to be the main, the main character in our true crime podcast. And under the guise of anonymity, we want you to talk about your killings, basically, on the podcast. So they call the podcast Based on a True Story. So there's this whole thing where, listeners don't know whether this is real or not, but then the podcast blows up and becomes like super popular. And nobody really figures that the guy who's talking about these, what they think are fictitious murders, is actually the real serial killer who's just talking about his own experiences. And it's sort of like a dark comedy, basically. And then they get,
In the US, it appears to be on Peacock.
All right.
In the US. And it got a 76% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's good though, man. You love it. It actually is really good. It's probably one of my favorite shows
check that out.
last year. Yeah, the storyline is great. The characters are great. The acting is very cool, and it's really cool. The way it's written is those three characters, like the couple and the actual West Side Killer, they become sort of codependent of each other. So it's a really interesting sort of dynamic between the three of them. And it's very well written. It's funny as well. It's like a dark comedy,
Okay,
but I highly recommend it.
Speaking of dark, weird comedy, have you seen Resident Alien?
No, I haven't actually. I haven't seen it.
Oh. So Resident Alien, the first two seasons are on Netflix.
Okay.
At least in the States. Season 3 just finished on Sci-Fi. I don't know when it will make it to Netflix.
Right.
But it's I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Hold on, let me see if there is a Alan Tudyk or Tudyk. You'd know him if you saw him.
Okay.
The last name is spelled Tudyk. Alan Tudyk. He's been a bunch of things. Firefly,
yes.
and iRobot and Rogue One, Star Wars. He was in, actually. He was in a show with Jeremy Sisto where he played a dentist that was fantastic. But Resident Alien is so well done. So again, it's one of those shows that the casting made the show. He is brilliant in it. Each episode, so it starts out, I know a couple of people who made it through an episode or two and they couldn't continue because it's stupid comedy, right? But each episode builds. And that comedy at the end of every episode, there's almost like a fable type lesson in it that he
Right.
reads out loud. And by the time you get to season 2 or 3, it's a serious alien murder mystery. And it's just super fun and super well done. Yeah, if you have not seen Resident Alien, highly recommend it.
Cool. That's going on the viewing list for sure.
Oh, so good. I would argue. So here's what's funny. I don't laugh out loud at a ton of shows. I laugh out loud at Seinfeld, MASH. I laugh out loud at Modern Family. I laugh out loud at. I would argue I had more laugh out loud moments during Resident Alien than almost anything else I've ever seen.
Awesome. Yes, that's definitely
Very
that's definitely one to go on the list. It's we're always looking for shows to watch. It's one of our pastimes. As I always say, the thing with my wife is she used to go to film school, and she's always her thing is always it's like dialogue, and that's kind of what she's interested in. And so we often, we love a lot of the same shows, but we love them for different reasons. Like I would look at a show and I'd be like, oh man, the color grading is great, or the lighting is phenomenal in this, and she'd be like, yeah, but the dialogue is shit.
Yeah,
and then,
exactly.
And but a lot of the time with a lot of the shows, there are things that she'll love about them, and then there are things that I love about them. Like what we were talking about earlier, there's some of the sci-fi shows. If the storyline is really good and it's really well written, the characters are really all there, and the story development is all there, then it just adds so much to the story. And then plus if the production design is really on point, and if it's lit really well, then, and if the color grading is really well done, then that just ticks all of my boxes basically, immediately at the same time.
For me it's what I consider to be the Quentin Tarantino scenario. And that is it well written, but more importantly, are the pieces brought in correctly? Right? Is it cast well? Yes, it has to be well written, but then it has to be well cast, and then it has to be well assembled. I always go to the movie Memento, which is effectively told in reverse.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things in Memento that are brilliant, but it's the assembly of all of those individual pieces of brilliance that makes the show a success to me, right? It's the I don't want to say it's the completed product. It's not. It is each individual piece. But I always, like, for me, I'm really big on, like, for example, they've got the new Benjamin Franklin show with Michael Douglas as Ben Franklin. And
really?
I watched the trailer and I barely made it through the trailer because all I could think was, this could be brilliantly done. All I can see is Michael Douglas. Like, I don't see Ben Franklin. I see Michael Douglas.
Yeah.
With Michael Douglas's voice, right? He's not even trying to do a vocal tone from that era. And that's the thing to me, is it's got to be, all these pieces have to be brought together. And that's what Quentin Tarantino does to me. Or Guy Ritchie is another one that does that.
Yeah, it's often, it's especially when you have shows where there's like, you have like a strong relationship between two of the main characters. Is so important that these characters are really well cast. And, sometimes that kind of, that energy just isn't there. I'm thinking of, like, I'll tell you a really good example for that is, do you remember a show called Santa Clarita Diet with Drew Barrymore and Timothy Olyphant? Like, they worked so well together, as a double act. Like,
we started watching it, and I don't think we made it through the first episode even.
Right. So it's a bit of a slow burner. You're gonna have to kind of, because at the end of the first episode, that's when there's a pivotal moment happens that actually sets up the entire rest of the season, or actually the whole show. But Timothy Olyphant was really good in it, and he really played very well off. Drew Barrymore's character gets weirder and weirder as she becomes more and more of a zombie throughout the whole show. It gets, in the second season, it gets a little bit, I don't know if they ran out of ideas or it just got a little too weird for my liking, maybe. But there was this sort of beautiful moment probably towards like I don't know, towards the middle to the second half of the first season, where everything seemed to work like really perfectly together. Like the story development, the characters, even all of the supporting cast, like really fit in well. So yeah, it's one of those shows that I enjoyed. And I'm not a zombie fan at all. It's not really my bag usually. But I guess more of
I'm not
comedy,
either,
you know?
but the right zombie movie can be fantastic. I'm trying to think of the one movie where the guy was a zombie and he befriended a girl. Oh man, I got to think of it because it was fantastic. And same thing kind of with, some aspects of Fallout, done well, any story can work. It's when they lean on any individual piece as a crutch that, to me, they can, they end up jumping the shark at a certain point.
Yeah, see, sometimes you find out, like, especially like, I don't know, 5, 6 seasons in, but all of a sudden it seems like they're running out of ideas, and then everything starts to kind of fizzle out a little bit, and it kind of loses its initial magic a little bit. I'm trying to think of
Warm Bodies. That was the one. I had to Google
Warm
it.
Bodies. I
Warm
remember it,
Bodies.
yeah,
Love that movie.
yeah, yeah. That was a great movie, actually. That was very cool. I'm thinking of a show where it sort of starts. Did you ever watch like things like Yellowstone, for example?
Never could. Yellowstone to me, and I like Kevin Costner generally, but Yellowstone to me was like watching the old Dallas, or one of those. It was it was a nighttime soap, which is just not me.
Yeah. True. Yeah. I mean, the thing that frazzled me about things like Yellowstone, there's a whole range of what was the other one with Sylvester Stallone? Tulsa King. Do you remember that
Never
one?
did.
So the thing there is like where you have TV shows where all of a sudden you've got like Hollywood A-listers all of a sudden playing leading roles in TV shows, and at first you go, I'm not sure whether that translates that well. That was my initial issue with Yellowstone, was that I couldn't really see. It's just weird seeing Kevin Costner in that show. Do you know what I mean?
Because you don't see the character, you see the actor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. I mean, Sylvester Stallone did a really good job in Tulsa King. That was actually quite amusing because it also has this kind of comedy feel to it, and it's like sort of mobster based and all the rest of it. So it was funny. Pretty good entertainment. Not one of my all time favorite shows, but definitely watchable. Absolutely. And cinematography wise, pretty well made.
You need to tell me when you finish Fallout what you think.
Yeah.
And same, if you end up watching Resident Alien, you need to tell me what you end up thinking.
Oh yeah, that's definitely next on the list. Like I said, we're about. I think we finished episode 3. I'm pretty sure we finished episode 3 of Fallout. So yeah, that's what's going to happen after this. I think it's another episode of Fallout.
Yeah, it's the funny thing was, and this happens very rarely, but when my wife and I finished it Saturday, last night, we went out to dinner last night and came home and we're sitting and watching TV, and she literally said to me, I wish we could watch another episode of that, because it's one of those shows that just hooks you. The analogy that I'll make is Breaking Bad. They're nothing related, but we didn't watch Breaking Bad for years. Like it had been finished and gone for years, because originally it was going to be filmed in the area that I live. Southern California, Riverside County was the meth capital of the world in the 70s. And so when they were going to do it, they were going to film it here. They couldn't get a tax break. Vince Gilligan got a tax break in Albuquerque, New Mexico,
Right.
and was better for the desert scenes. And I'm like, I don't need another drug, show, whatever. Finally we went, okay, someday we should just watch it. And we watched episode 1. This was when season 6 was about to start, is when we started, or about to finish up, when we started watching it. And episode 1, and you're like, oh my God, like this is insane. Let's do another one. And you can't stop. Better Call Saul, on the other hand, was the opposite. Halfway through season 1, I couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah,
because
exactly
I loved,
feeling, yeah.
oh my God, I loved every character, and I love the actor that played his brother, and I love the brother character, but it got to be just mentally draining watching it, and we stepped away. And about 2 months later, we went, let's give it another shot. We watched one or two more episodes, and then it changed. And by
Yeah.
the end, I would argue it was as good as Breaking Bad. By the end, it's a phenomenal series, but it started slow.
So the thing about Breaking Bad was that with a lot of shows, it's the initial premise that gets you hooked. Like the whole idea
Yes.
of a high school teacher turning drugs meth cook. That idea is it's actually such a really good hooky idea. That by the end of the first episode, once they've established the actual premise of the whole show, then there's a really high chance you totally get hooked to that. That's exactly what happened with Breaking Bad. Because I think Breaking Bad was just one of those shows that I started watching, not expecting very much, that sort of thing. It was actually, I tell you what was funny with, I had exactly the same experience with 24 originally, because I never watched
Really?
24. Yeah, so I never watched 24 until like season 8 came out or something. And I remember like for years people were talking, 24, have you seen 24? And I'm like, no, I haven't seen it. And I kind of kept thinking like, I don't want to get hooked into another show, because I know what I'm like. Like if I like a show, I can get super hooked and then I get totally addicted to it and I need to binge watch it,
Yep.
right? And so I kind of thought like I just don't have time for that. So and I kept saying to people like, don't talk to me about 24. I just don't want to hear it. Anyway, so I'm pretty sure it was like season 7 or 8 or something that was out. I went to my local Blockbusters. Back in those days, we still had Blockbusters, right? And I went into the store, and it's one of these things. I was like one of the most long-standing, most established customers in the joint, where basically the guy behind the counter kept asking me about movie suggestions, at that point. So I came in and I was looking for something to watch. It was like a holiday weekend or something, and I couldn't find anything because I pretty much figured I've seen most of the stuff in the shop. And so I went to the guy and I said, like, do you have any, like, can you recommend anything? I don't really know. And he goes like, oh yeah, if you've seen 24, we've got season 1 here. And I'm thinking, all right then, okay, fine, I'll get it, right? So I got it. This is like a Friday night. And I came home, put it on the shelf, but didn't really watch it until the Sunday. And then Sunday afternoon or something, we just went, it's nothing on TV. What shall we do? There's nothing to watch. And then my partner at the time said, oh, you rented that 24 DVD set. Like maybe let's give that a shot. So we put it in, and literally within the first 20 minutes, I was completely hooked. And then we literally watched the entire season in real time over the next 24 hours.
Well,
And
and
then-
that was the thing also. Well, go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
But then, right? So then we got to the end of season 1, and we had to have season 2. So I went straight back to Blockbusters, and I went in, and the guy goes, "Oh, yeah, there's a problem because we don't have the original, the original case. We have the DVDs, but we don't have the case, so we can't rent it to you." And I'm like, "Well, why not? You've got the DVDs right there." He goes like, "Yeah, but we don't have the case, and I'm not allowed to rent it to you without the original case." And I'm like, "Well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm willing to pay you. You've got the DVDs right there. Like, can you not just like, I pay you cash money?" He goes, "No, can't do it." So I walk out of the store and I'm on the phone to my partner and I said like, "Oh, guess what? They won't give it to me because they don't want to rent it to me without the original case." My partner went off her flipping trolley. She went nuts, jumped in the car, went straight to the store, raced in there and gave him hell. And literally within 30 seconds, she walked out with the DVD set. Like it was season 2. I'm like, okay, cool. We're set for the next 24 hours. And that's basically, we then completely binge watched everything up to like the current season at a time.
And 24 was one of the early, if not one of the first real series to take a season and make it a contiguous story.
Yeah.
The next season was a different contiguous story, but
Exactly.
it goes to what I was saying about the casting and the writing and everything. It was well written, but without Kiefer, I don't know that it would have worked. Right?
Exactly.
Breaking Bad without Jesse and without Bryan Cranston, I don't know that it would have worked.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like that little change could have killed the show. It was, call it luck, call it good casting, call it bringing in the correct writer's room, whatever it is.
Yeah. All the
It's
stars just
that
align at that moment.
freak, it's that freak assembly or meeting of a number of different things that make something great. And then past that, you still need the freak accident of the audience buying into it.
And
Like there's
and you
been
need
great shows the audience didn't
yeah.
get.
Exactly, and you need that special premise, you know. So the thing, just like with Breaking Bad, the thing with 24 was that it was the first time that somebody thought of like actually shooting something in real time. You know, where even when there were commercial breaks, the show continued in real time.
Yep,
Like there was a
24
5 minute
hours
break, 5 minutes had gone by in real time. So
off
it
the
was just
clock.
like, you know, it was an amazing sort of experience, you know. And I think it just takes that special, that X factor sort of thing, that special premise on the show, you know, plus the right casting, plus the right pace throughout the whole thing as well. Because that's the thing, like in later seasons of 24, I think sometimes they, you know, and this happens with a lot of shows, as you get a few seasons in, all of a sudden the pace starts to kind of get a little bit lackluster, and you feel like it's hanging a little bit. And of course, in 24, some of the main characters that got killed off, then all of a sudden came back and were like the bad guys. And you sort of, sometimes you kind of felt like, oh, maybe they're running out of ideas. Is that what's happening? Like Lost is a really good example for that as well.
They jumped.
There
There was
was
a
like,
point 24 jumped the shark. Same with
yeah,
West Wing. Like West Wing is one of my favorite shows of all time, but there was a point where West Wing went, you know,
yeah,
they took a hard left when they should have stayed straight.
yeah. Same.
Um,
Did you ever
yeah.
watch Lost back in the day?
No, never got into Lost. Again, Lost came across, I watched a little bit of like the pilot or something, and
Mm.
it came across a little bit as a soap opera to me. And maybe
So
I'm wrong.
yeah, so the first season was actually really good. It was like riddled with mystery. It's almost like it was a puzzle. You know, you couldn't really figure out what was going on. Plus, you didn't really. It was interesting because you know, it starts with this plane crash on this island, and through the first season, a number of weird things happen that make you just think like, I'm not sure everything is what I think it is in this show. Like, are they actually dead? You know, or like, are they experiencing afterlife? Or what's going on? There was like just weird things that were happening. And then of course lots of people came up with like lots of like, you know, theories as to what's going on. And so the whole thing became much bigger than just a show. There was actually a website that was dealing with like Lost related mysteries and all the rest of it. But then from season to season, you were kind of waiting for answers. You know, like the resolution to some of those questions. And you were hoping that these puzzle pieces would come together to reveal this amazing master plan. And that never flipping happened. And then when the show eventually finished, nothing was answered. Like nothing was resolved. And it was a
Oh, that
real,
would kill me.
one of the biggest letdowns. And actually to the point, I can't remember how many seasons there were, quite a lot. I remember by the end of it thinking, what a colossal waste of time. You know, I've been
Well,
hoping
and
for all this to come together, and I just didn't. I was
the original Quantum Leap, I was a huge fan of. They canceled it, a big outcry from viewers, and so they decided to let it keep going, but it still got canceled, you know, before the end. And I've been watching the newer Quantum Leap, which I enjoy and I like. And somebody told me at NAB, they said, "Oh yeah, it's been canceled. It's not coming back." I'm like, same thing. I need to know how it's going to end. Do they get him back? I hate when they do that, but
oh man, there was one of the greatest shows I've ever seen. Just can't remember what it was called, but it was probably 10 years ago or something. Like, the premise was amazing, right? So basically, what happened was, there was a worldwide event where 30 seconds of time went missing, and so lots of shit went down. Planes fell out of the air. Trains crashed, cars went off bridges, you know, tankers went into bridges, wherever, you know, like basically everything went to shit. And this team of investigators was, you know, then were supposed to figure out what actually happened. And so they were looking at like lots of CCTV footage and, you know, and so wherever you were in the world, at the very same moment, people just blacked out for 30 seconds. I literally woke up 30 seconds later and everything had gone to shit, right? And so they were trying to investigate and figure out what's going on, what caused this worldwide event, right? Like, was it a nuclear attack? What was it? Like, was it aliens? What the hell, right? Couldn't figure it out. Then, a few episodes in, as they are checking CCTV cameras of a baseball stadium where a game was going on, they fast forward to that very moment. Everybody blacks out. The entire audience is blacked out. And then, somewhere in the back, they'll see one figure walking through the crowd. And they go, wait a minute. Who the heck is that? Why is there one person when the entire rest of the world's blacked out? How come there's one person that shows up on a CCTV camera, a shadow basically, a nondescript black figure that seems to be walking through the audience or through the people in the stadium. And then, of course, the hunt is on. It's like, who the flipping heck is that? And what the heck was going on? And that's how this whole mystery develops, right? And then it comes to the end of the first season and it gets canceled. And you go, well, now I never know. What the hell happened? Who's that guy? What's going on?
Yeah.
Oh, man, it ruined my life.
Yeah. I mean, my attitude is, if you're a network and you've given somebody the green light on a show and it's supposed to be multi-season and you're going to cancel it, you've got to let them do at least a wrap-up show.
Yeah.
You have to.
At the very least, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was that broke my heart. I mean, honestly, it's such a good show.
Well, I'll tell you right now, if Fallout doesn't come back for season 2, all hell's going to break loose. Yeah.
Well, you can burn the
because
studio
people are
down.
going to want to know what happens next.
That's it. Oh man, yeah. That's the thing about TV shows. Terrible thing. Well, Steve, I think we've broken the 2-hour limit barrier.
Have we really?
Even yeah. So I think we're at 2:21.
Oh
man,
my God.
It's been super fun catching up with you. And now I managed to get through one rum and coke. That's definitely not breaking any records.
No. See, I can't. It's still afternoon here. I've got to edit some things for KCal, my whiskey picks. I've got a couple I got to edit.
Yeah.
But tonight
for
I will
those-
pour whiskey. Last night, though, I poured the worst whiskey ever. Oh, my God.
Really? What was that?
It's that one I was telling you is
Oh,
it
right.
won the London Awards, and it's like, tonight I need a good one.
What is your top number one recommendation when it comes to whiskey?
That's affordable or just overall?
Okay, overall, and then something that's affordable or at least available generally.
My generally favorite whiskey, and it varies every year. It's a very allocated bottle, retail's not much. You won't get it for retail. Retail's 120, I think, and you'll usually find it for maybe 1,200 or something like that. It's ridiculous.
Oh, wow.
Is George T. Stagg.
Okay.
Love George T. Stagg. I like Stagg Jr. It's not called Stagg Jr. anymore. Stagg Jr. is the same thing. Every release, they usually do 2 releases, I think, on Stagg Jr. They release, batch 1, then batch 2, then batch 3, and each one they're single barrel, so they're different every year. But when it hit batch 17 and then went to 18, at 18, they considered it to be an adult, so they dropped Junior, which was a huge mistake because everybody still calls it Stagg Junior because you have George T. Stagg is the senior. George T. Stagg is a wonderful, wonderful bourbon and expensive. Even in a bar, you're going to spend anywhere from, I've been in bars where it's $60 for a pour, and I've been in bars where it's $120 for a pour.
Oh, wow.
But my favorite is probably George T. Stagg. From the affordable side, man, that's a tough one. It depends if you're a whiskey drinker or not. If you're not a whiskey drinker, I'd tell almost everybody, try Angel's Envy. It's a really easy drinking, good starter whiskey. I tend to prefer higher proof whiskeys. And so for me, I'm a big Jack fan. I love regular Jack Daniels.
All right.
But some of the newer Jack, like if you're a rye, if you want to try a great rye, Jack Daniel's single barrel proof rye is an over the counter findable whiskey. It's $60 US and it is fantastic.
Amazing. So maybe the next live stream we'll do a little whiskey tasting.
That'd be
I
fun.
still remember the whiskey tasting we did in London. Actually, that was hilarious.
That was yeah, exactly.
I mean, I
Yeah, we
say I
had fun
remember
walking
it.
around London.
Oh yeah, it was super fun. I had fun
Yeah.
tasting those whiskeys. I mean, I say I remember a lot. I don't really remember that much.
Yeah.
So it
Well,
must have been good.
probably as it should be.
Yeah, exactly.
But now, see, David's converted you now. Now you're a rum and coke guy. So
you know, I do like whiskeys. I'm not, like I said, I have zero experience in it. You know, and I don't really know that. I really cannot discern whether one is better than another. Do you know what I mean? That is different.
it also depends. It also depends if you want an American whiskey or a Scotch or an Irish or a Japanese whiskey. They are completely different animals. I have friends who are super into Scotches. My son tends to prefer Scotches or Irish. I tend to prefer American whiskeys, which tend to be stronger, bolder, and sweeter. Um, but the Scotches and Irish tend to be a little bit more delicate and intricate.
Yeah.
But again, I really like high proof whiskeys. Like my George T. Staggs, I think I've got one that's 132 proof, and I've got one that's 128 or something. I've got a bottle of Jack Daniel's that's 142 proof, which is technically hazmat, or 140.2 proof, which is technically hazmat. Over 140 is hazmat. And those are all okay for me. Whereas Scotches are usually 80, maybe 86, maybe 90. You know, they're completely different animals.
Yeah, I'm starting to discern different types of rum now that I've tested a few. You know, I'm starting to find which ones I like. Like I've realized that I like spiced rums more than white rums, for example, or dark rums. I'm not a huge fan of, but like spiced rums are like just right in the middle. You know.
Yep.
There's one called Dead Fingers, which I recently got. In fact, my wife got me that for Christmas, I think, or something. That was a really good bottle of rum. I really enjoyed that.
Siesta
Especially
Key has a great, which is out of Florida. Siesta Key has a great spiced rum. And then again, for the radio, I do a pick every week. I have since early October, so almost 7 months. And there's a whole list of that at the KCAL FM website for KCAL on the Rocks. All the things. It's almost always whiskey. I've done 2 tequila picks. I've done a cognac pick. Did I do a brandy pick? No, but I did a cognac pick. I've got a wine pick coming up. But most of the time, most of those picks are whiskeys, and I'm at around 30 of them so far. So,
Oh wow! I still have your glasses. Your shot glasses are up there.
oh,
So
do you?
yeah,
Good.
next time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
All right.
Next time. That's something to look forward to
Appreciate-
for the next next live broadcast.
I appreciate your having me by, man.
Oh man, it's always good fun. Always good fun to catch up. And of course, for those of you who are still listening, well done. After 2 hours and 27 minutes, I'm impressed. But we have another collaboration coming up between the two of us and Dave Clayton. So we're going to be recording an episode between the three of us roughly about in a week's time, week and a half, something like that. So that should be interesting. And I'm sure we'll talk about it again on a live at some point. That'll come out in a few weeks' time, I guess. We haven't really decided on a
Yeah,
release date
it's-
for that. particular
And
episode.
Dave is from He Shoots, He Draws podcast. And just a wonderfully nice guy. I was on the podcast years and years ago when he was still doing He Shoots, He Draws with Glenn Dewis, before he was doing it with my buddy Alan Hess. And I'm looking forward to next week. You should tell him what the topic is.
Oh, yes. Actually, before I do that, let me just see. Just got a comment from Drake. Drake just caught the last 20 minutes, but I enjoyed it. Need to catch up on the rest. You've got another 2
Drake.
hours to catch up on.
And Drake's a friend.
100%.
Drake's a friend of mine. Super nice guy. Great photographer.
Fantastic. Souk Photography Adventures. I will definitely check that out. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us on here. But yeah, so our collaboration thing, it's three podcasts collide. Camera Check Podcast, He Shoots, He Draws, and Behind the Shot. We'll be talking about, I'm sure we're going to be talking about all sorts of different things. We'll end up on whiskey again, I'm sure, no doubt. But we're also going to be talking about what it's like to actually create a podcast and, talk photography podcasting in general, because it's one of these things. It's not always easy, especially when you're putting lots of content out every week. And, I'm pretty sure we can all learn from each other and, take each other's advice on how to do. Because you guys have been doing this for a lot longer than I have. So, I'm looking forward to that.
And people don't realize, like, I don't have sponsors. I've had some people offer to sponsor. And early on, when I first started, I wanted to get sponsors and make money and blah, blah, blah. And there reached a point where I didn't want to do that. And so I don't. But my podcast cost me money. Like, it cost me a good amount of money and a huge amount of time. It is not unusual, including all of the emails, planning it, scheduling it, picking the shot we're going to dissect. It's not unusual that I put in 8 to 10 hours for a show.
Oh, easy. Yeah, absolutely. It's,
and
and plus
it's crazy.
It's crazy. And on the money side, of course, it's, there's lots of subscriptions you get to pay for every month, because hosting a podcast isn't free. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that.
The Ecamm software that you're using to stream and record this.
Exactly. So that's subscription fee. There's all sorts of different stuff. The system I use to create vertical video, for TikTok and Instagram, whatever, that costs money. So there's monetary input that needs to go into making a show. There's an interesting thing. So that's part of what I talked about at the photography show actually a few weeks ago was this sort of thing, where imagine a triangle where you have good, fast, and cheap, and only two of those things can ever be true. If it's good and fast, it won't be cheap. If it's cheap and fast, it won't be good. And if it's good and cheap, it definitely won't be fast. So once you accept that in the making of things like that, whether it's YouTube videos, whether it's podcasts, stuff like that, then you very quickly realize that actually, if you want to create a lot of content, you're going to have to somehow, come to terms with the fact that you have to spend some money somewhere. And for instance, as far as the Camera Shake podcast is concerned, I have a sponsor, Platypod, that sponsors the show. That support goes straight into me being able to afford things like Ecamm. So it goes straight back into the show. Anything that, when people support us on buymeacoffee.com, and I've just mentioned that, you can support the show on buymeacoffee.com/Camera Shake, where you can buy us a coffee, which would be absolutely amazing. All of that goes back into, helping me to create more content, essentially. And the net benefit of a show like this, and this is of course something we're going to talk about in more detail in our collaboration episode, but I think, I don't know about you, but when people learn that you run a podcast, and especially when they learn that you've been running a podcast over X amount of years and you created hundreds of episodes, for example, people immediately ask like, oh, so do you earn money with that? And I always say to people that the net gain, as far as this podcast is concerned, goes far beyond monetary remuneration for me. It's
right.
Opened doors. I've made friends. I've gotten to know people that I would have never connected with without it. It's enabled me to do things that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. And so the benefit for me goes far, far, far beyond the actual the monetary side of it. And of course, the people that I managed to connect with, the people that listen to the show, people who come back and say like, oh, that was a really interesting conversation, or I've learned so much from this or whatever. That's what makes it all worth it. Ultimately, you can't really put that into monetary terms. But that being said, as you said earlier, it still requires some financial support, because in order to keep the show on the road, essentially, you have to. I mean, all the technology. Obviously, people can't see that, but we're surrounded by tons of technology to make this even happen.
Yep.
cameras and computers and microphones and lights and all the rest of it. Um, the thing that fascinates me about this is,
Yeah, I've got more than one mic.
yeah, exactly. I see, and then I've got tons of lights around me as you can see.
Yeah.
But there's a color light over there, and there's a hair
And the
light over
thing
there.
is, like, again, I don't have sponsors. I have a Buy Me a Coffee account. I don't think I ever mention it. So, I mean, I probably haven't had anybody donate there. On my website, I have a Buy Steve a Diet Coke button, which effectively takes you to a PayPal, type thing.
Yeah.
I never really mention them. I know people who do. I've never been real comfortable mentioning them. So rarely does anybody ever use them. Periodically, I'll just get an email that says somebody gave you $5 on PayPal. I'm like, oh, cool. But
Yeah.
the only real income that I have predictable is a little bit of money from YouTube for my videos, and that does not cover my costs. It's that little.
Yes.
It doesn't cover my hosting and my Ecamm and my Adobe and those type of things.
Yeah.
So it would be nice if you made a little bit of money, and I don't. But part of the thing is, for me, for people who don't know podcasting, you have to have a certain viewership to really get a sponsor to be interested in you today. And it's difficult to prove to people because we don't have Nielsen ratings, for podcasting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot behind the scenes that happens with podcasting that, to a certain point, it becomes difficult in this day and age with the Spotifys of the world buying Joe Rogan. It becomes more difficult to get real corporate sponsors that sponsor podcasts on a regular basis, unless you have huge download numbers. If you know somebody like you and I are both Platypod pros, then you can get a company that understands that, look, you're speaking to my audience, right? It's the example I always used to use was, if you're a dentist, advertise, in the program of a high school marching band, because every parent for every kid in that marching band, or every person in that marching band, probably has a little brother or sister that is also going to need braces at some point, right? You're speaking to a captive audience. When I worked in radio in Detroit, we were big, huge top 40 radio station. Our little teeny religious AM station made more profit than us because those people didn't hit buttons. Those people listened to that radio station 24/7. And it's the same thing. Hammer Shake Podcast gets podcasters to listen. If you have a photography product that's good, like Platypod products, it makes sense that they speak to your audience, because that audience are all potential buyers.
Exactly. I mean, so commercial relations like that, it's relatively easy to, over time, it's become easier, I would say, to build those kind of relationships. But it's all about relationships. Yeah. It's like people are not necessarily going to knock on your door saying, "Oh, yeah, we want to sponsor your podcast." It's a matter of building those relationships over time. And when I say, like, for instance, running this podcast has enabled me to do things that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. For example, a good example was, in the beginning we talked about the Platypod videos that I create. That's got nothing to do with the podcast, but that connection wouldn't have occurred had it not been for the podcast. So that's what I mean. There's a lot of things. In fact, I mean, the fact that I was invited to speak at a photography show earlier this year wouldn't have happened had it not been for the podcast. So it's right. So there's a lot of things that have happened because of the podcast that have enabled me to do things. That I just wouldn't have otherwise been.
Same with your new dancing gig, the stripper pole gig. That wouldn't have come around
exactly
right?
that
without the podcast. Yeah.
Yes, exactly that. And there's other things in the pipeline that are going to be happening, over the next few months that I can't really talk about at this point. But this is really what. That's really sort of that's the payoff in a sense. But I always say this, the biggest payoff for me in doing this has been the amount of knowledge and the amount of friends or connections, that I've been able to make over the last few years. I mean, I've learned so much. I mean, just, the thing is, if you think about it, like, when I first started this at the beginning of the pandemic, just as a thing to keep me sane, essentially, right? Just because I need to do something creative and I need to do something on a regular basis, and literally everything was shut down over here. At least it was, mega shutdown or lockdown. From that point where it was literally just my mom and my friend Nick's mom listening to this podcast, to now, when you now look at the world map in the data, and you realize that there's people sitting in like India listening, or in Australia, or in like South Africa, or in like all across the United States. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's crazy. You know what I mean? And
I get listings of charts emailed to me. Never am I near the top of the charts in the US. There's amazing podcasts that are up there that I just don't compete with. But I'll hit top 10 in Switzerland or Japan.
yeah.
And it's like, really? There's somebody that listens to me regularly in Japan, an amazing music photographer, Aki Fujita,
right.
that has said to me, and she was actually on a show that I did where, I had people share the best advice somebody's given or the worst advice, something like that. But she's actually said to me that she's learned some English by watching my show, to which I think to myself, this may be the wrong show to watch to learn your English from, but okay.
Yeah.
But
Whatever,
again,
yeah,
I got to hang out in London and for a full day walk around London with Dave Williams and Kirsten Lutz and had a blast. And there are people I know from doing podcasting. Photo Joseph, who now lives in Bulgaria, lived in Oregon. I just hung out with him at NAB and had dinner with him for the second year in a row. And we saw him when he lived in Oregon. Don Komarechka, I consider one of my best friends.
Yeah.
I've never met Don in person. Like a year or so ago, we were 20 minutes probably from where he lived in Canada. He had just moved to Bulgaria.
Right.
And I didn't get a chance to meet him. But I know Don very, very well. The picture behind me of the snowflakes right over here, that's right. Don's. And, really podcasting has, again, this is going to be a conversation for next week. It's going to be fun. You guys should tune in to that conversation that we're going to do. We're recording it. We're all going to release it at the same time. Yeah. It should be fun.
And Dave Clayton's podcast, He Shoots, He Draws, is a phenomenal podcast in its own right. It's, it's very interesting because that podcast is split between graphic designers and photographers. So there's some super interesting conversations happening on that as well. And of course, Dave has been doing this for a lot longer than I have. So to me, it's like, it's this thing. It's like I said earlier, it's this thing like where I used to listen to you guys and now I'm talking to you guys, which is like, to me, it's like, oh, well, that's crazy in its own right.
Yeah, and I would argue people sometimes, I don't think, take the bigger picture in. Like when I used to do the critique shows with Don, I would tell him, I don't care if you're a landscape photographer. I don't care if you're a music photographer. You can learn more probably from other landscape photographers than other music photographers. And it's the same with He Shoots, He Draws. Originally with Glenn Dewis, an amazing photographer, also has been on my show. And now his co-host is Alan Hess out of San Diego, literally wrote the book on music photography. But the design side, if you as a photographer can't find the benefit in the design talk, again, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Because composition is effectively graphic design.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave is such a incredible source of information. I mean, he's literally written the books on InDesign and Photoshop and all the rest of it. It's incredible. I mean, I remember when this last year, when did I do the first program for the Albert Hall? It was about a year ago, and I did it all in Photoshop. But I basically, I text Dave and I'm like, man, I need some advice on this, da, da. And he goes like, oh, why aren't you doing it in InDesign? And at the time I said, because I've never used InDesign. I don't know. I know Photoshop really well. So he talked me through how to do this, how to set this project up in Photoshop. And then this year I thought, like, you know what, I'm gonna take the jump and I'm gonna jump into InDesign and figure out how to do this. And of course I had lots of questions as well, but he's always on the other end of the phone, where I can ask him just about anything. Which is, again, it's like one of these benefits of doing this podcast that has just allowed me to make connections to the point where I'm in a lucky position that if I need any advice on any of those design apps, I've got the man right on the other end of the phone. So if there's any
Right.
question I have, I'm lucky enough to be able to get that help,
See,
and
I'm
if,
an old PageMaker user,
oh,
like
PageMaker,
original
yeah.
PageMaker, which I loved, and Freehand. And
I
then
remember, yeah.
Freehand got purchased and got rolled into Illustrator, and of course PageMaker went away for a long time, and then
Mm.
everybody was using Quark, and now then you ended up with InDesign. I've been using Photoshop since I think it was version 2.5
Yeah, similar.
on Photoshop, like long before layers.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I started using Photoshop, yeah, around about version 2, something like that, in the like 90s still. In fact, a fun fact for you. The very first thing, the reason why I got into Photoshop was because I had to design a CD cover for my band back in the 90s, for our first EP. And it was literally like, we've been to the studio, we recorded 3 tracks, and it was just at a time when you could burn your own CDs. So that had just happened like in the late 90s or something. And of course now we could mass produce our own CDs, and somebody needed to design a cover sleeve for it. And nobody seemed to be capable of it, but my roommate had a computer, a PC at the time, with Photoshop on it. And I just went, I guess I'll do it. And it was only a few weeks ago when by sheer chance I figured out that particular EP is available to buy on this obscure website where, I don't know, somebody's probably selling it or something. But I came across that original CD cover design. I'm thinking like, oh wow, yeah, that's cool. I don't know, that's the very first thing I've ever done in Photoshop. Like, the
I
first
love
thing
it.
ever. Yeah,
Full
it's very
circle.
cool. Full circle, yeah, exactly. But yeah, that was a long journey for sure. Anyway, this should be a really interesting episode to listen to. Like I said, we'll record it. Is it next week? Yeah, I think it's next week.
Yeah, Tuesday,
Um,
next Tuesday.
that's
And then
right.
it'll
So
it'll take a few days obviously to get edited and stuff like that. So
yeah, so it'll probably come out the week after that or something. We'll make sure that it fits in with your release cycle and days.
yeah, and whatever.
Yeah, for me it's easy because I release every week, so
Yeah.
easy for me.
We'll get it done.
Yeah,
It's gonna be
100%.
fun. Everybody should tune in.
Absolutely. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the live stream. Of course, I'm sure we'll do more of these. Like I said, I want to make live streams a regular feature. So that'll be cool. Probably next time
Pleasure
we'll do like
pleasure
a
was
weekly
all
thing.
mine, my friend. It was more than anything, it was just good to catch up.
Yeah, exactly. That's what this is for. So for those of you who are still listening, you probably would have noticed these conversations here on a live stream are a little bit less structured than they would be on an actual Camera Shake podcast episode. Although I doubt that even those conversations are structured in any way, shape, or form. But there you go. I think we've chewed the fat on just about anything and everything. But so thank you so much for listening, and make sure you join us again at the next live stream or every Thursday when I release a new weekly Camera Shake podcast episode. So, Steve, thank you so much, and we'll be back soon.
Thanks everybody for